The Holiday Shop. Blue Moon Bay Series, Book 8. By Susan Hatler. Chapter 1. If I could sit on Santa's lap and whisper my Christmas wish into his ear, I'd ask him to turn the clock back a year, or even a month, to when my dad was still alive. Tradition had been my dad's middle name, and we'd always decked his store with the same beautiful decorations for Christmas. But this year the magic wouldn't happen. Stuck with reality, that was me. I don't want to make assumptions, Anna, but are you trying to kill Santa? Carrie cocked her head to the right and batted her dark eyelashes at me. They do say that homicide increases around the holidays. It's not my fault this Santa weighs a ton. I wobbled on the way too high up step of the metal ladder planted on the sidewalk in downtown Blue Moon Bay. My stomach lurched and I gripped the top rung with shaky fingers. Don't fall, Anna. The last thing my family needed was another death this holiday season. Sucking in a breath, I shifted the giant and way too jolly blow-up Santa Claus decoration a few inches to the left. What happened to the gold bells that used to line the downtown shops? They were so much easier to balance. Things have changed since you've been off living the city life in Chicago, my dear. Her tone held way too much humor at my frustration. Santas will hang between each of our downtown shop awnings this year. Lots of Santas. I raised an eyebrow. Have I mentioned I don't like change? She shrugged. Only a dozen times this evening. Have I mentioned my fear of heights? She shook her head. Not in the last 30 seconds. Well, my fears bear repeating. I'm volunteering my time to decorate the outside of your shop, and yet you refuse to validate my love of the traditional gold bells. I craned my neck to view my best friend below, whose mouth twitched at the corners. Warmth flooded through me. It felt comforting living in my hometown of Blue Moon Bay again. I'd tired of the fast-paced city life in Chicago, and my small beach town on the California coast was exactly what I needed right now. Is Santa still tilted? If so, I'm going to chuck him across the street at Frankie's Fiesta and give up. Don't even think about blowing our margarita connection. The toe of her red leather boot tapped against the cobblestone street where she stood. Unfortunately, Santa is a tad lopsided still. Can't you torque him to the left more? He's just so heavy. I sighed, trying to twist him upright. Maybe he should lay off the Christmas cookies, she suggested. Agreed. I laughed, slinging the inflatable Santa over the hook where we used to hang the traditional gold bells. Then I scrambled down the ladder before I could sustain a serious injury. I wiped my hands together. Straight enough. Besides, since when are you worried about what goes with the rest of the town? It was a fair question to my best friend. Carrie had to be the most individualistic person I'd ever known. After we graduated high school a decade ago, she decided her dream was to open a kooky craft shop, filled with hand-painted tiles and glass ornaments she'd blown herself. After 7 years of saving and borrowing money, her dream came true and she opened Carrie's Kaleidoscope. With anyone else, I would have predicted the store crashing and burning in the first month. But Carrie had managed to grow her business for 3 years now, even earning a dedicated clientele. She did especially well around Christmas, selling her handmade baubles for Christmas trees. Which was more than could be said for my family's business, the Main Street Mini Mart. But that was another story. Sigh. I pushed those depressing thoughts to the back of my mind at once, since this was meant to be a good night. Carrie leaned on the ladder and shrugged. The new rules came in about the decoration changes, and I don't want to upset the other shop owners by refusing to comply. It's supposed to be the season of joyful giving. My gift is to follow the new rules. This year, anyway. What new rules? I glanced down the street, taking in the various independent shops with their bright-colored awnings. Each awning had a giant blow-up Santa hanging on either side of it. It was like that movie Multiplicity times 10. I never expected the Blue Moon Bay Chamber of Commerce to change one pebble of sand, let alone the Christmas decorations for downtown. What happened? Didn't your family get the letter that was sent to all local businesses? It laid out the new guidelines for Christmas decorations this year. Knowing Mom, she threw it straight into the trash. I sighed, kicking at the sidewalk with the toe of my suede boot. She's been dealing with all of the business paperwork since my dad died. It's been a bit overwhelming for her, to say the least. My brother had some ideas about running the mini-mart differently, but you know my parents. She winked at me. Yep. Tradition, tradition, and tradition. I get why that's their motto, though. The Main Street mini-mart feels like a Blue Moon Bay landmark. But my brother has never respected the history of it, you know? She gave me a quick glance and then looked away, making me wonder what she was holding back. She folded the ladder and set it against the storefront. Then she slipped her arm through mine and nodded toward the town square. Let's get down to where the Christmas tree lighting will take place. It's supposed to start at 8. Sure, I agreed, letting her lead me down the sidewalk, which was bustling with people. We arrived just outside the town square, stopping amongst the twinkling lights and way too many Santa decorations. Everything in my world was changing. I couldn't even have the same gold bells that had been hanging downtown since I was a kid. Hey, are you all right? Carrie nudged me. I've been better. I shrugged, wishing I could get into the Christmas spirit. It had always been such a joyous time of year for me. But without my dad, it will get easier. Carrie squeezed my hand through her bright red gloves. My throat tightened and I didn't reply. The thought that it might get easier to be without my dad felt wrong. But I knew Carrie meant well. What did she know about how I felt? Her dad was alive and well and loved helping out with her business. She got to see him every day, whereas I'd never get to spend time with my dad again. It still felt unreal. There was also the financial mess that my mom and brother were dealing with regarding the mini-mart, which made my head spin. If only the Christmassy spirit that Blue Moon Bay was trying to create could make me feel better. I'd always loved the tradition of watching the parade come through the downtown streets, culminating in the switching on of the enormous Christmas tree in the town square and the lighting routine. This year, the tree towered higher than ever and the lights seemed bigger and brighter, too. It's after 8. Shouldn't the parade have started by now? I asked, glancing around at the groups of people lining the streets, including families with kids who looked like they were hoping to see Santa himself tonight. Definitely inflatable Santas, for sure. Must be running late. Carrie checked her watch, glancing around. All we need is a couple cups of hot cider and we'll be set. Think we have time to run into the coffee shop? Your call. I smiled at my friend, not wanting to be a downer. But the only reason I'd moved back to Blue Moon Bay so close to the holidays was because my dad had passed away in November. I closed my eyes for a moment as that suffocating feeling hit me like a ton of bricks. I wanted to curl into a ball and hide under my pink princess covers like I used to do as a child when I'd have a bad dream. Back then my dad had always made me feel better. In addition to missing my dad, I was worried about the bills that were piling up for the Main Street mini-mart, the store my parents had owned and run for decades. Even as my brother, Chuck, had been taking care of the funeral arrangements and comforting my devastated mother, debtors had been coming by to collect on money we'd had no idea Dad owed. My dad had always wanted to put forward the front that he was this hyper-successful businessman who could provide for his family with no trouble whatsoever. My parents had put both Chuck and me through college, but now that we'd gone through the finances, we understood how much those large expenses had cost them. The thought of shutting the doors on the mini-mart was painful. It would be the final goodbye to my dad, a farewell to the memories of him hefting me onto the counter so I could help him work the register, and of him sneaking me candy when Mom wasn't looking. So much of my past was wrapped up in that place, and I didn't want it to change in any way. My mom had received an offer to purchase the mini-mart, though. The kind of offer that I knew, deep down, she couldn't refuse. I had caught Mom looking over the paperwork this morning when I'd come downstairs early to get some coffee. "What's that?" I'd asked. "Nothing." Mom tried to shove the papers into her bag. I snatched them up, scanning the papers. I didn't recognize the name of the man making the offer on the mini-mart, but he had a San Francisco address, which meant he lived just north of our little beach town. "Are you going to accept this offer?" I asked. "What else can we do?" She gave a helpless shrug, letting out a long sigh. "It's a lot of money, Anna. I could retire and be fine for years to come." She was right. It was a whole lot of money. But to hand this place over to a stranger would be to say goodbye to the family history that was caught up in the store, including all of Dad's hard work. I wasn't sure I could bear that right now. "You're actually thinking of selling the place," I said, my voice soft. "Don't tell your brother yet." She slumped back into her chair at the dining table. "Maybe when we sell the store, we can bargain with the new owner to run it the same way. Maybe they won't change it too much." "And if they do?" I asked, pointing out the obvious. "I don't know how much of a say we'd have." Her eyebrows came together and she shook her head. "We can't afford to keep the place running without," she bit her bottom lip, unable to say the word. "I know," I said, not wanting her to say it either. "Without Dad." I bit my bottom lip, too, a habit I'd picked up from her. Quickly, I raised my chin and vowed that there would be no changes to the Main Street mini-mart. We'd have to make those terms a condition of the sale. That, or we had to find a way to keep that place in business so we could run it. No matter what happened with the store, I'd moved back from the city for good. This place was home to me. Plus, I was currently covering as many shifts as I could to keep the store open and ensure that we had as much money as possible coming in. While I worked the register, Chuck was looking for investors willing to give us a loan to help us consolidate our debts to a manageable level, and my mother, as eternally practical as she was, kept marking up the prices by 10% in the hopes of gathering enough income to keep the store alive. It had been painful losing Dad, but he would have been proud to see the way we had all come together to fight for our family business. I would be lying if I said my life wasn't beyond stressful right now. But that was why Carrie insisted on taking me out to the parade tonight. She'd failed, however, to mention all of the changes to our traditional Christmas celebration. "Who's lighting the tree this year?" I asked, leaning toward her so others wouldn't hear. It could be a real tug-of-war assigning the honored spot of tree lighter. We had the oldest person living in Blue Moon Bay one year, the person who volunteered to help the town the most another year, and more. With so many of us rooted here in Blue Moon Bay, okay, maybe I'd been gone a few years, I didn't want to bring up any hard feelings to whomever didn't make the cut. "So, you haven't heard?" She raised an eyebrow, making a face like she was in pain. "Oh." Hopefully it wasn't one of her ex-boyfriend's parents or something. "Tell me," I said, since the suspense was killing me. Just then, the crowd jostled behind me, and I turned to see a man, about my age, pushing his way down the sidewalk toward us. Sorry, excuse me," he said, a cheerful smile plastered on his handsome face as people parted to let him by. He had a mess of dark hair, an expensive jacket that hung a little skewed as if he'd just thrown it on, and broad shoulders that tapered to a slim waist. I didn't recognize the guy, and he looked fresh from the city. Maybe a tourist? He pushed his way forward until he was practically beside me. Then he made a perpendicular move to dive out onto the street and into the oncoming parade. What? Was he crazy? Clearly, so I grabbed him by the arm and stopped him. You want to get crushed? I asked, taking a firm grip on his, very muscular, arm. I nodded toward the approaching brigade of elementary school students with their woodwind instruments and the trailing veterans in their wheelchairs. I need to get over there. He turned until his gaze met mine. Then he paused, his green eyes peering right into me. A little zing zipped through my belly. Then he gestured toward the town square. I'm late. I need to switch the Christmas tree lights on. Wait, you are switching on the lights this year? I pushed aside the belly flutters, focusing on why this obvious out-of-towner would be taking over the most important role in our town's traditional Christmas festivities. Why did the committee choose you? Because he paid for the entire thing, Carrie chimed in, giving me a meaningful look. Wait a minute, my gaze flicked back to the hot city guy. You're the one who changed the traditional gold bells to all of the inflatable Santas? He straightened proudly. I thought it would be fun for the kids. I guess. I glanced around and had to admit the children did look unusually enthusiastic this year. And you paid for all of this just so you could switch the tree lights on? No, he shook his head, looking amused by my question. I did all of this to show that Blue Moon Bay is now my home, too. What do you mean? I asked, surprised this guy lived here. Judging by the look on your friend's face, she can fill you in. I turned to take in Carrie's wide-eyed expression and strained facial muscles. I couldn't help but laugh. What in the world was she wanting to say but holding back? Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm late to switch on a certain Christmas tree. He grinned, started to leave and then turned back to me. Would you like to join me? No, I'm fine here, I replied lamely. Okay, maybe I kind of wanted to go with him. But, hello? Inflatable Santas after decades of tradition? Not going to fly with me. Plus, the guy had almost run into human traffic just because he was late. He was way too impetuous to be my type. I'd stay here with my best friend where it was safe. My loss, he said, those green eyes seeming to take me in one last time before he ducked off. I shook my head as he cut through the parade, dashing in and out of the flute and clarinet players until he made it to the tree. It was a wonder he hadn't been run over. I turned to Carrie. Who was that guy? I'm surprised you haven't heard people talking about him yet. She squeezed my arm, staring off in his direction as the mayor shook his hand. That's Peter Locke. He's been buying up the old farmhouses outside of town, among other things. What for? My eyebrows came together. Peter Locke. Peter Locke. Why did that name sound familiar? I kept my eyes on him as he stood next to the tree. Surrounded by the glow of colorful lights, he looked even more handsome. Ugh, I was totally losing it. Probably because it had been too long since I'd had a decent date. Most guys I'd gone out with lately were fun for a night or two. But I just couldn't get into all of the fantasy football or whatever sport seemed to occupy their thoughts and monopolize our conversations. Snooze. Everyone in town has been speculating about what Peter Locke is going to do with all of that property. He even bought the island off the coast and named it Blue Moon Island. Apparently he's fascinated by the Kissed by the Bay legend. Huh, I said, thinking about the romantic legend etched on the plaque by the shore at the inn at Blue Moon Bay, which claimed that if you kiss someone at that precise point by the bay, under a blue moon, then you'll be in love with that person forever. Personally, I'd find a legend about compatibility and commitment more on par with everlasting love. I hear he's been purchasing new properties in Blue Moon Bay left and right. She kept her eyes glued on him as if she were trying to figure out his intentions. Most people are worried he's going to change everything, make a ton of money, and then hit the road. Just here to make a quick buck? That's awful. I kept my gaze fixed on him as he smiled, shaking hand after hand. People certainly weren't acting like they hated him. But then I remembered something. He did say he was planning to stay in Blue Moon Bay. So, whatever changes he makes, he'll have to live with them, too. Ah, the hot guy has you forgetting already. Carrie stared at me and then pointed to the inflatable Santas hanging between the storefronts. Ugh. Thanks a lot for the reminder. I looked at the Santas, once again missing the traditional gold bells. I remembered my dad taking my brother and me downtown while the bells were being hung. Since our last name is Bell, my dad said each set of gold bells were a special tribute to my brother and me. For years, I thought the town had bought those bells just for us, which made me feel so special. My dad loved to tell stories and they filled me with joy and wonder. He'd buy us hot chocolate and we'd walk around looking at all of the Christmas decorations, our tradition year after year. But not anymore. This Peter Locke guy shouldn't be making everything different. Why can't he just leave our town alone? Too much money and not enough to do? Carrie wondered aloud and then rubbed her fingers together pointedly. I hear he's got family money. His dad became super rich in oil, I think. Must be nice, I said, wondering what it would be like not having to worry about money. I wouldn't know since we were being forced to sell our family store. And then it hit me. Peter Locke. That had been the name of the buyer on the contract my mom had been looking over this morning. The buyer who wanted to purchase my family's store. My jaw dropped. Was that what Peter Locke was planning to do with our beloved store? Buy up our place, make a bunch of changes, and then turn it into a tourist trap for some quick profit? I watched him reach over and hit the big red button to turn on the Christmas tree lights, and the entire square became bathed in red, blue, yellow, green and white twinkling lights from the Christmas tree. Right then and there, I made a vow that Peter Locke wouldn't change a thing in our mini-mart. No way, no how. And all at once, a rush of purpose raced through my veins. I had to do something. I had the opportunity right now to make an impression on the man who might own our family business. I needed to take that opportunity while it was here in front of me. Literally. I turned to Carrie. I have to go. Anna, what? Call you later, I said, before she could get the rest of her sentence out. I pushed through the crowd and hurried across the street toward Peter Locke. If he was going to buy the Main Street mini-mart, then I would have to convince him that tradition was the essence of this town and the only direction for him to go with our store. If I had to take him all over Blue Moon Bay to show him what was special about this town, then that's what I would do. That was the only reason I was pushing through the parade to get to the town square. Or, at least that's what I tried to tell myself. Chapter 2. My boots clomped along the cobblestone street as I charged toward the Christmas tree in the town square, ready to convince Peter Locke that change was not in his best interest when it came to Blue Moon Bay and my family's mini-mart, and that keeping with tradition should be his only option. Okay, to be honest, maybe a small part of me also wanted to see those beautiful green eyes up close again. But I told myself that last part was inconsequential. I mean, a woman can't be blamed for having eyes, can she? I kept my gaze on Peter as I carefully crossed the street, after waiting for a break between parade marchers, and to my unwitting delight he grinned when he caught my eye. I tried to ignore the belly flutters those green eyes ignited in me as I walked up to him. After all, I was on a mission and needed to focus. I decided to take you up on your offer, I said, my cheeks heating under his gaze. He stared at me for a long moment without saying anything, as if he were surprised to see me again. I felt a sudden rush of panic. Had he been joking about asking me to join him? Maybe just a whimsical invite that he hadn't really meant? Oh, no. I began to feel utterly mortified and pondered how fast I could run in the opposite direction. I'm glad you decided to come, he said, the corners of his mouth curving upward. Relief washed through me and I blinked several times. You are? Very much so, he said, extending his hand toward me. We didn't formally meet earlier. I'm Peter. Anna, I said, putting my hand in his. Warmth enveloped my hand and he gently squeezed, sending tingles racing up my arm. I smiled at him, noticing the way his gaze seemed to take in my entire face as if trying to put it to memory. My brown eyes, upturned nose, and full lips had never seemed special until this moment. I'd had many compliments on my long dark hair, but that was mostly hidden beneath a white beanie hat right now. Very nice to meet you, Anna, he said, his tone sincere. You, too, I said, loving the feel of his warm skin and the fact that his hand was still wrapped around mine. Remembering why I'd come over here, I cleared my throat. Shall we follow the parade? I know the route they always take, so I can show you the way. I'm having the parade go a different way this year, he replied. Of course he was. My facial muscles strained, but I forced myself to relax. The old way was wonderful, I said, squeezing his hand, hoping it would help him sense the importance of tradition. But I guess you're in charge. He glanced down at my hand. I prefer things to be a group effort, he said. Jackpot! The tips of my fingers slid across the back of his hand as I finally let go of what had to be the longest and most enjoyable handshake in history. Peter gave me a smile and then grabbed a bundle of keys from the podium by the tree where the mayor had been speaking earlier. He handed the keys to me as if the gesture were no big deal. I glanced down at the special keys, which had a tree lighting ceremony keychain with the City of Blue Moon Bay logo on it. Each year, these keys were entrusted to a person who was very important to our small beach town. Peter Locke was that VIP this year. And he'd handed the keys to me. Wow. Breathe, Anna. Breathe. I'd seen this ceremony enough times to know what was going to happen and what I needed to do. But, still. I'd always been an eager onlooker, not an actual participant. Not that I was going to complain. This was actually totally exciting. I quickly searched for the largest key and pushed it into the lockbox beside the lamppost in front of us. As I twisted the key to the side, the lights strung along the town square gazebo burst into action, bathing us in a bright wave of multicolored festivity. There was a brief pause around us and then whispers ensued, as though the crowd had no idea what to make of me. I mean, Peter had turned on the Christmas tree lights, but then I'd walked up here and taken control, which clearly wasn't expected. Not that I could blame anyone for their curiosity. Part of me wondered how I'd gotten this lucky, too. Peter had handed the keys to me and I felt totally wrapped up in the excitement. What had started as a dismal evening was turning into something special for me, thanks to Peter. I glanced around until I caught Carrie's eye. She quickly began to applaud, raising an eyebrow at me as the rest of the crowd joined her and started clapping, too. Thank goodness the crowd wasn't going to mutiny about my participation. I turned to Peter and smiled. That was fun, I said, beaming at him. You're a natural, he said, his eyes lighting up as if he were having just as much fun by watching me. Ready to get going? We have lots of lights to switch on tonight. How many stops are there? I asked, wondering how much he changed the normal routine. He placed his hand on the small of my back as we stepped away from the town square, guiding me to the front of the parade. The band picked up the tempo behind us and began playing Jingle Bells as we started down Main Street. 4 more stops, he told me. He still seemed pleasantly surprised that I joined him, which caused a wave of guilt to flow through me. He might not know my real motives for joining him, but I told myself he didn't need to know. It's not like I was doing anything bad. In fact, I was helping him and this town by trying to convince him that keeping things old school was the way to go. That way, if he did buy the Main Street mini-mart, then perhaps I'd be able to keep him from turning it into a mere tourist trap for making money. You ever done the lights before? He asked. Me? No. I shook my head, remembering all of the times I'd dreamed about switching on the lights as a girl. This is a special Blue Moon Bay tradition, though. It's sweet of you to give me the opportunity to participate. I'm very flattered to be included. I'm glad to make you smile, he said, as the murmur of the crowd began to pick up and everybody made their way down Main Street behind us. Plus, it's nice to switch things up a little this year. Good to try something new, you know? Tradition is good, too, though. Don't you think? I asked, surprised at how much he radiated joy and how his excited look made him even more handsome. I found myself smiling up at him. The traditional tree lighting ceremony is probably the best way since they have done it so many years in a row. I don't know. He shrugged and gave me a wink. You should see how much your face has lit up since I handed you the keys. Not sure I'd trade tradition for that smile. My belly did a little flip. But then I reminded myself that Peter and I seemed to be moving away from tradition, which was the opposite direction I needed him to go. Yikes! We've arrived at the next set of lights, he said, taking hold of my hand as we came to a halt next to a lamppost with a hand-painted lockbox. I marveled at how natural my hand felt in Peter's, but then reminded myself that I was here to make sure the Main Street mini-mart wouldn't be changed. Not flirt with the new guy in town. So, in keeping with the tradition of the tree lighting ceremony, I handed Peter the keys and smiled. Your turn. You sure? He asked, as if I were the one giving him permission instead of the other way around. I nodded and then he found the key with the same band of color as the lock, put it in the keyhole and turned it to the left. Above us, a set of snowflake lights illuminated a warm glow over a giant inflatable Santa. The band started playing Santa Claus is Coming to Town and I'd bet money Peter had picked the tune. The guy had a major thing for Santa. You chose all new decorations this year, huh? I asked, glancing at the Santa hanging above us. The snowflakes around him looked like illuminated lace. I had to admit they looked beautiful, especially against the crisp darkness of the night sky. He nudged me playfully. You like them? I nodded. They're very festive. I love this winter wonderland, a young boy shouted from behind us. It's almost like Santa is really here and it's not even Christmas yet. The real Santa will be here before you know it. Peter smiled at the boy before turning back to me. Guess Santa is pretty popular. I nodded. I have a soft spot for the gold bells, though. The old wooden ones? He asked, his eyebrows lifting as we kept walking. I'm sure they were great in their day. But they looked really dried out, like they might burst into flames if someone turned the lights on too close. Seemed like a fire hazard. What's more Christmassy than a good fire? I asked, realizing I was totally reaching here. I had to think of a comeback fast. We could have roasted chestnuts on that fire. Fail on the good argument. Epic fail. I prefer my town a little less crispy fried, he joked as we continued to the next station. Yeah, I suppose I do, too. I couldn't help but laugh at his retort, and it amazed me how completely relaxed I felt around Peter. He seemed to roll with my banter instead of getting defensive or uptight at my suggestions. Lots of the guys I'd met from the city tended to fall into one of those two categories, but Peter was easy to be around. I didn't want to get too comfortable with him, though. This wasn't a date, even though it kind of felt like one, and I had limited time to get him on the side of tradition by the time this parade was over. You mentioned you live in Blue Moon Bay now? I asked, looking up at him. My friend said you've purchased quite a bit of property around here. That's true, but I haven't officially moved from San Francisco yet. I'm staying at the inn at Blue Moon Bay for now, he said, fiddling with the keys in his other hand. I'm hoping to renovate my Victorian soon enough. You can't be planning on renovating everything you buy, I pointed out, wondering if this guy was a closet contractor at heart. Surely some places are perfect the way they are. Oh, Anna, he said, giving me a wink. How can I say for sure what I'll do with the properties? My mind is open to all possibilities. Right, I said, feeling a flicker of hope that if he were open to all possibilities then that meant there was still a chance he wouldn't change a thing. We turned the corner and I spotted the next station beneath two large banners, which hung between the buildings and depicted scenes with Santa and his elves. Peter let go of my hand and flicked through the keys on the keychain. Cool air rushed under my palm. I missed the feel of his hand around mine, even though I knew that was ridiculous. I'd just met him and we barely knew each other. He was about as far removed from me as a person could be. But at the same time I couldn't help but feel a connection stirring between us. Not good, Anna. Not good. The next set of lights came to life above me, and I glanced up. All of the sudden I felt breathless. The colorful glow looked super romantic. I glanced at Peter and our eyes met. A warm feeling filled my chest and I had the sudden urge to press my lips to his. Embarrassed, I turned away and lowered my gaze. I didn't want him to guess where my mind had gone. After all, he'd probably just asked me to help with the lighting ceremony as a friendly gesture. He was new to town, probably didn't know many people, and only wanted to make a friend. His attention didn't mean anything more than that. Did it? How are you able to buy up so much of Blue Moon Bay? I asked, searching for a reason to get rid of the warm fuzzies I was feeling for the guy who wanted to buy my family's business. Say what you really want to know, he said, raising his eyebrows and waiting for me to say something more. When I didn't, he shrugged. My family did well in Texas with investments and has done well in San Francisco, too. There's so much character to the city, but I'm ready for a quieter life. I came through Blue Moon Bay last year and the place seemed ripe for some updating. I could tell this coastal town has a lot to offer. I want to add fresh, new ideas to businesses to help them grow. My stomach sank. I don't know if that's such a good idea, I gestured at the buildings around me. Part of what makes Blue Moon Bay so charming is that it's a bit old-fashioned. Traditions have been in place for decades, independent businesses line the streets, and the residents can count on these consistencies that help us feel safe. The charm is important, he said, nodding. But have you noticed some of the businesses are failing? It doesn't have to be that way. I want to inject some new life into those places to help them thrive. My eyebrows came together. You're saying a business is lifeless unless people are making money hand over fist? Nothing feels lifeless tonight, he replied, his eyes locking with mine. Hot tingles rushed up my neck. Was he flirting with me? I certainly wasn't flirting with him. I wasn't. Okay, maybe I had a little. But could I be blamed? His excitement about everything felt infectious. This was the happiest I'd felt since I'd returned home. Guilt immediately washed through me. How could I feel happy when my family's store could be turned upside down by the very man standing beside me? Time for the next lockbox, I said, rubbing my hands together and trying to focus on something other than Peter. Anything else? What else did people talk about? Oh, the weather. Nothing romantic about the weather. It's getting chilly out here tonight. I wish I had something to warm me up. My eyes flared as soon as the words came out of my mouth. Yeah. It definitely sounded like I was flirting with him. He looked at me with an obvious smirk and opened his mouth to say something. Before he could say a word, I snatched the keys from his hand and mumbled something about hurrying to the next station. My legs moved at a fast pace, but Peter sped up to keep in step with me, and the parade continued along behind us, continuing to play Christmas carols. I wanted to get in the Christmassy spirit, but how could I? Thinking about injecting new life into my dad's mini-mart made my heart sink. I couldn't let his life's work go down the drain. "What's your favorite Christmas movie, Anna?" Peter asked, glancing over at me. "It's a Wonderful Life," I said, automatically. I love that movie. My family and I used to watch it together every year, before I stopped myself, not wanting to consider settling down in front of the TV to watch that movie without my dad. "What about your favorite Christmas movie? Perhaps a classic?" "Oh, yeah. It's Die Hard," he said, a grin spreading across his face. I spluttered with laughter. "Die Hard is not a Christmas movie." "It totally is," he argued. "It's just a different take on a Christmas movie." "I get the feeling you don't like anything the old-fashioned way," I said, mostly to myself. Sigh. "Nothing wrong with new ideas." He nudged me with his hip as we approached the next station. I smiled, despite myself. He was so effusive that it made everything fun, even something as typical as a Christmas movie. It would be hard to shift his way of thinking, though, that much was obvious. If he bought my dad's store, I had no idea what would happen to it. I checked the key ring for a yellow key that matched with the color on the lockbox, inserted the correct key, and then turned the key to the left. The row of lights ran high above us along both sides of the street. The white lights twinkled like stars in the darkness, making the block look more like a movie set than my hometown. I hated to admit it, but I loved the wondrous mood it created. "These lights must have cost you a small fortune," I said, gesturing to the twinkling lights above us. "I don't mind injecting new life into the holiday season to show everyone in town that I'm not here to take away the fun stuff," he said, his breath coming out in a misty puff of air in the cold evening. "They're beautiful," I admitted, handing the keys off to him once more. Only one more station left. I had to act quickly. I wasn't sure exactly how to get him to see my point of view about tradition, but I might not get another chance to get him by himself, so I couldn't waste the time I had now. But what more could I say? "How long have you lived in Blue Moon Bay?" he asked, as we continued down the street. "My whole life," I said, forgetting that I'd been in Chicago through most of my 20s. Being back here now made it feel like I'd never left. This was home. My parents moved here before I was born. They were living in New York, but apparently my grandpa had done nothing but talk about his family vacations to Blue Moon Bay and how wonderful they were. So, my parents came here for their honeymoon. They loved the town so much that they moved here soon after. "Your grandfather never came back?" No, I shook my head, wondering why my grandpa had refused to even visit us here if his vacations had been so amazing that he'd never stopped talking about them. Weird. When we'd visit him in New York, he would sit my brother and me down on his lap and tell us stories about visiting Blue Moon Bay with his parents. They used to stay at the inn at Blue Moon Bay on their vacations. Apparently, he even fell in love with a girl there one summer. The corners of Peter's mouth curved upward. I can imagine that happening here. I bit my bottom lip, wondering what he meant by that comment. "Actually, I've lived here for most of my life, but not all of it. I moved to the city for college and lived there since. But I came back when..." I cut myself off before I could reveal the truth about why I returned. Letting him know about my dad seemed far too personal. Plus, if he knew about my relationship to the store, then that could tip him off to my reason for spending time with him this evening. He glanced over at me. When? What? It's just good to finally be home. I missed Blue Moon Bay. I shook my head, having the strong urge to blurt out the whole truth, drop to my knees, and beg him not to make any changes to the store my dad had built with so much love and care. I took a deep breath, knowing I needed to keep a level head. I love the consistency here in our small beach town. Tradition keeps everything warm and familiar. Maybe that's hard for someone like Peter Locke to understand, but anyway. You know, I just realized I didn't get your last name, he said, cocking his head and thankfully dropping the reason for my return. Just call me Anna, I said, hoping to seem more mysterious than evasive. Okay, Anna, he gave me a curious side glance and slowed his pace beside me. But when do I get to find out your last name? Depends, I said, giving him a coy look. I only reveal that information to the people who need to know it. You're really a secret agent, is that it? He laughed as we turned the corner and approached the final station. I'm just a private person. I shrugged, thinking that was true enough. We looped around the last of the downtown blocks. I held my breath as we passed the Main Street mini-mart, noting there was no inflatable Santa out front. Guess my brother hadn't gotten the memo. I let out my breath as we moved past Fiona's flower shop and arrived back on the downtown street where most of the residents would do their Christmas shopping in the next few weeks. Carrie's store was at the opposite end of this street, which was where I'd first bumped into Peter. I'd come full circle this evening, but hadn't made any progress on my goal. But for some reason the evening didn't feel like a total failure. What would a guy have to do to find out your secrets? Peter asked, interrupting my thoughts. The corner of his mouth tipped up and I was glad that he hadn't seemed to notice my awkwardness as we'd passed the mini-mart. What lengths would you be willing to go to? I asked, unable to resist the flirtatious banter. Dinner, he said, flashing me a full grin. On me, of course. Maybe you could help me learn more about this town, too? You seem like a woman in the know. What do you say? My heart fluttered in my chest. Was he asking me out on a date? It certainly seemed that way. I hadn't been on a decent date in a long time and hadn't considered anything romantic since I'd arrived back in town. But I was tempted by his offer. Very tempted. This dinner wouldn't be in the name of romance, though, I reminded myself. This would be a chance for me to convince Peter that keeping things the way they were, at least with regards to the mini-mart, was the right choice. My dad's legacy would be safe and the mini-mart would carry on the way it always had. There was only one choice. I'd love to have dinner with you. I raised a shoulder, trying to play it cool, even though my belly danced as we approached the final station. Where did you have in mind? What's your favorite restaurant? He asked, lifting the final key toward the lock. Huntington's Seafood Grill, I said, with total certainty. They have amazing seafood. I look forward to finding out, he said, taking my hand in his. Help me do the honors? Absolutely, I said, a giddy feeling growing inside me. With Peter's hand wrapped around mine, we put the last key in the lockbox and then twisted the key together. A moment later, the street around us burst into light. Delicate snowflakes dangled from every building and red and gold strings of lights ran between the buildings, bathing the cobblestone street in a warm glow. I took in a steadying breath and the rest of the crowd seemed to do the same, all of us marveling in the beauty of the new decorations. Pretty, huh? Peter said, watching my expression. He looked at me expectantly, as if he were proud that he'd pulled off the best trick in the world. It's beautiful, I said, because it was true. But could a new mini-mart be just as beautiful, too? My stomach clenched. No, not in the slightest. A new mini-mart would erase my dad's handprint on Blue Moon Bay. My eyes watered at the mere thought. The old decorations hold a special place in my heart, too. I'd love for you to tell me about that over dinner, he said, a smile curling up on his face. In his eyes, I saw a window of opportunity to convince him one-on-one why some things in this town would be better exactly the way they've always been. I'd be happy to, I said, meaning every word. Are you free tomorrow night? He asked, glancing at his watch. 6 o'clock? Sounds good. I grinned at him and then felt a flutter in my chest. I did my best to ignore it. This was purely business, even if he didn't know that yet. Looking forward to it, he replied, and I realized that my hand was still in his. Let me know your address and I'll pick you up. Oh, no. My blood ran cold. I was staying with my mom, so I couldn't have him pick me up there and risk them running into each other. I pulled my hand away from his and stuffed it into my pocket, my teeth on my lower lip again. And then an idea hit me. Why don't we meet at the tree at 6 instead? I said, remembering the look in his green eyes when he'd spotted me joining him. It seems more poetic somehow, I said, trying to appeal to his whimsical side. The corner of his mouth hitched up. Jackpot. I'll be looking forward to it, Anna, he said, giving me a warm smile. Thanks again for saving me from the parade earlier. Anytime, I said, and with that, I turned to head back into the crowd, noticing Carrie's face as she craned to catch my eye. I could tell by her facial expression that she wanted to hear all of the details on what had just happened. But I had to figure out my own game plan before I shared it with her. I was a woman on a mission. And my fingers still tingled from where his warm skin had held mine in the bitter cold of this winter evening that hadn't turned out so bad after all. Chapter 3. As I waited in the town square for Peter to pick me up for dinner the next night, I wrapped my arms around myself and let out a long sigh. It was freezing out, with the cold beginning to permeate my bones. Okay, it wasn't 32 degrees or less, but it was chilly by California standards and my Chicago winter clothing was still packed in boxes. I couldn't have Peter pick me up at my mom's heated house, though, or he might figure out I was a member of the family with the mini-mart he planned to buy. The last thing I wanted was for him to put those pieces together. So, here I was, in my going-out dress and a pair of thick boots that didn't go with my outfit but kept my feet warm while waiting for him to pick me up for our date. Yes, date. Because that had to be what he'd meant when asking me to dinner, right? So, I had to make it look like I was taking this date seriously. Not as if it were just an opportunity to convince him to leave our store the way it was. Chuck reported no luck, once again, on finding an investor to consolidate the massive debt. I was beginning to come to terms with the fact that the place was probably going to end up out of our hands. But the least I could do was try to ensure that we could keep the mini-mart the way it had always been. The thought of my mom having her last connection with Dad severed made my heart hurt. I hopped from foot to foot and blew out warm breath into my closed hands to try to keep warm, but my attempts were pretty much futile. I'd arrived by the Christmas tree early, which had been a big mistake. BRRRR. I wished Peter could have come by the house like a gentleman and arrived early to meet the family first. Though that would have been more It's a Wonderful Life than Die Hard, so maybe not his style. Perhaps he was going to zipline down the side of the building and protect me from a hostage situation? Totally Christmas to Peter, I was sure. The thought made me smile. As if on cue, I heard the mumble of an engine cutting through the quiet street. I glanced up to see a car approaching and couldn't help but grin when I saw what he was driving. I'd expected something flashy and expensive, but the car he pulled up in was an older but handsomely maintained SUV. He pulled up to the curb next to me and smiled. He hopped out of the driver's side and came around to pull open the front passenger door. "Good evening, Anna," he said, gesturing for me to get in. "Hi, Peter." I smiled at him and slipped into the passenger seat. Thanks. He closed the door and then walked in front of the car, coming around to the driver's side and hopping back in. I was going to suggest we take the scenic tour around town so we could look at the lights, he said, raising an eyebrow at me. But I figured you might be bored with the new lights by now. Not bored, I protested, the politeness that I had been raised with overwhelming everything else. But I did already see them last night. And you're not a huge fan of change, right? He put the car into gear, pulled away from the curb and then took off down the street. You prefer tradition. I nodded, impressed that he'd picked up on that last night and that he'd remembered it. There's something very special and comforting in tradition, I said, watching his mouth twist to the side. But the lights were lovely last night, I added. The corners of his mouth lifted. I booked a table for us at Huntington Seafood Grill just like you suggested. The restaurant is right there at the inn, but I haven't tried it yet. There's a lot about this town you haven't discovered yet, I said, flashing him a smile. Huntington Seafood Grill is actually a newer restaurant, but the inn has been around forever. There's so much history in Blue Moon Bay. I can't wait to hear all about it, he said, driving down the highway and then along the finger of land that led to the inn at Blue Moon Bay. Peter pulled into the restaurant's parking lot, turned off the motor, and cast a glance at the ocean waves rolling in. He had such an easy way about him, so cool and calm, as though nothing in the world bothered him. Or maybe that was just in comparison to me, given that I had just about everything on the line at that moment. If I couldn't pull this off, then we might see the business changed. And I couldn't bear the thought of that. After admiring the waves for another moment, he got out and came around to the passenger's side. He offered me an arm as I got out of the car. I hesitated for a moment and then took his arm with a smile. I knew that there could be townspeople inside who knew me. If they saw me walking on the arm of the man who was buying up most of the town, then that was sure to raise a few eyebrows. But maybe I shouldn't care if people gossiped about me. I was at crisis point here, and worrying about what others thought was way down on my list. Besides, the strength of Peter beside me felt oddly comforting. Somehow, spending time with Peter felt like the one good solid thing in my life when so much was shifting beneath my feet. The hostess greeted us, confirmed Peter's reservation, and then led us to a table by the window. As we were admiring the amazing view of the moonlit ocean, our server came over and my cheeks heated immediately. The server was Polly, who also happened to be a friend of my mother's. Yikes! My heart pounded against my ribcage as Polly gave me a blatant once-over and widened her eyes. Thankfully, she didn't say a word about knowing me or, more importantly, how she knew me. I wondered how likely Peter would recognize the seller's name of a business he wanted to buy, considering he seemed to be buying up so much in our tiny town. After Polly took our drink orders and left, my gaze drifted across the table to Peter. He took off his jacket to reveal an expensive-looking dress shirt beneath it. I couldn't help but let my gaze stray to his chest, and the way it looked beneath the white and navy blue striped cotton. So, what do you think of the restaurant? I asked, hoping he hadn't noticed that I'd been checking him out. Very nice, he said, lifting his hand from the table as Polly returned and set our drinks down. It's funny that I've been staying at the inn for many months and this restaurant is within walking distance, but I hadn't tried it out yet. The thought of Peter on a date with another woman made an annoying knot tighten in my stomach. Maybe you just needed to come here with the right person, I countered. You're absolutely right. His green eyes met mine and held, causing my heart rate to kick up a notch. He glanced at the leather-bound menu I was squeezing between my fingertips. I immediately released my grip, wondering when it had gotten so hot in here. So, you know that I'm living at the inn for now. What part of town do you live in? He asked. Not far from here, I replied, finding myself wanting to open up to this man sitting across from me, even though we didn't seem to have much in common. He was rich and my savings account had less than $1,000 in it. Sigh. Since I came back to town, I've been staying with my mom. My brother lives in the apartment over her garage. Do you miss the city at all? He asked. I bit my bottom lip, feeling surprised that he'd remembered I'd lived in the city. Not really. Chicago is beautiful and has a lot to offer, but I like the familiarity of my small beach town where everyone knows everyone. I'm looking forward to the closeness of living in a small town, he said, giving me a warm look. Where neighbors look after neighbors. It's a lovely concept. It truly happens here, I said, my eyesight blurring as I remembered how many people came to the memorial service we held in my dad's honor. Plus, all of the casseroles that were left on our doorstep for weeks. I lifted my glass of wine and took a long sip as I blinked the tears back. A tiny hole formed in my heart, growing larger as I sat there. What brought you back to Blue Moon Bay? Peter asked, his voice gentle as if he could tell exactly how I was feeling. I lifted my lashes, my gaze connecting with eyes so warm and caring that I wanted to open up to him. My dad died, I admitted. The corners of his mouth turned downward. He reached across the table and took my hand, skimming his thumb over my knuckles. I'm sorry to hear that, Anna, he said, shaking his head. His face turned solemn and his eyes watered. My dad passed away last year. I gasped. I'm so sorry. Thanks. I know you understand, he said, giving me an appreciative look before he sighed. That's how I inherited the money for all of these new projects. After he died, I wanted to strike out somewhere new and start moving forward with my dreams. I think my plans would have made him proud. I nodded, taking in everything he was saying. His confession made me see him in a new light. Not as some random rich guy who was buying up our town just to change it. But a man who was trying to live his dreams and make his dad proud of him. My dad would have loved Blue Moon Bay if he'd ever slowed down long enough from work to enjoy life more, he said, fingering the stem of his glass, his eyes turning from wistful to excited. He used to dress up as Santa every year for Christmas, even once I was all grown up. He loved the holidays. The new Santa decorations in town were a way for me to share my dad with the people here, especially the children. Bring them the kind of joy I always felt with the wonder of Santa Claus coming to town. And has your plan worked? Moving here and making changes to help you move on? I asked, a spark of hope igniting inside me. Not to move on. He shook his head with a wry smile. Mostly, I look around and see everything he would have loved about this place. But he was a workaholic. He rarely took the time to enjoy so much as a stroll on the beach. I knew he was working too much. I wish I would have told him about the stress I saw him going through and the toll that stress seemed to be taking on his body. If only I could go back and say something. I get it. I nodded, squeezing his hand. The warmth of him comforted me and I hoped I could give him the same comfort. There's so much I want to tell my dad, but can't. Before I could get another word out, Polly materialized beside our table with her notebook in hand and an expectant look on her face. Peter pulled his hand away from mine and straightened, wiping the vulnerable expression from his face. Ready to order? She asked. Anna? He asked, looking at me. I closed the menu and handed it back to Polly. The halibut special, please. Nice choice, Polly said, flashing me a secretive smile that made me wonder if she meant my choice of fish or the man sitting across from me. Polly had been one of the first people to come around to the house after my dad had passed away, and she was probably happy that I was out and about with someone fresh. Even though she had no idea I had some ulterior motives with this date. But, as the evening went on, I found those motives sliding away, becoming less and less defined in my head as Peter and I ate dinner and talked. He had moved away from the city, like me, when his dad had passed, and it felt as though our approaches to the same situations couldn't have been more different. Peter wanted to push forward and stride out into the new. I, on the other hand, wanted to cling to the past and hold on to everything I had known and loved. No matter how much I tried to guide him around to my way of thinking, he never seemed to concede my point. He wanted dynamic and fresh, whereas I wanted the familiar. He was impulsive and had the money to indulge those impulses, whereas I was cautious and had to be considering our current dismal financial situation. "So," he said, as he set his credit card in the bill folder. "Do I get to find out your last name yet?" "Huh?" I asked, stumbling for a reason to keep my last name from him when we'd shared so much this evening. His knee bumped against mine beneath the table and the mild contact was enough to send my head spinning. "Last night, you wouldn't tell me your last name," he reminded me, not letting me off the hook. I get that we just met and maybe my invitation had seemed a bit rash. But I like you, Anna. I don't want there to be any secrets between us. In small towns, the secrets don't stick very long, I assured him. But I didn't offer my last name either. How could I? Then he'd discover I really did have a secret. But I owed my family the possibility of keeping my dad's dream alive. I couldn't tell Peter who I really was, no matter how much I was starting to want to confide in him. "So maybe I'll do some digging?" he asked, wearing a playful smile. "Just ignore the Grand Theft Auto charges," I said, waving my hand. The evidence was sticky at best. "Well, for the first 2 charges, at least." He laughed as I got to my feet and pulled my coat back on. I looked around and noticed the restaurant was nearly empty now. We had been there all night, talking away and getting to know each other. And I'd had a good time. He was a wonderful conversationalist, easy to talk to and funny. He spoke with his hands, waving them around when he talked as though underlining every point he could. Peter was a sweetheart. A sweetheart who wanted to buy my dad's business and make it his own. Sigh. "May I drive you home?" he asked, raising his eyebrows at me. I hesitated for a moment. I wanted to say yes, but if he knew my mother's address then he could put the connection together with the mini-mart. No, I had to wait to reveal that to him. "Actually, it's a beautiful night for a walk. I'd love for you to drop me at our spot by the Christmas tree, if you don't mind. You're a mysterious woman, Anna. But if that's what you prefer," he gave me a long look and then offered me his arm again. I took his arm, loving the feel of his strong muscles beneath my hand. It felt colder than ever outside, but there was something warm deep down in my belly that distracted me well enough that I could pretend not to notice my visible breath as I exhaled. "What did you think of Huntington's?" I asked, gesturing to the popular restaurant that had built a nice clientele. "Pretty delicious, huh?" "I really enjoyed myself," he said, glancing over at me. "You said the place was on the newer side. Does this prove that some fresh ideas are welcome in your life?" "I certainly hope that's the case, Anna." "You may be right about some fresh ideas being good," I shot back playfully, because it's not like I could argue that Huntington's wasn't a wonderful addition to Blue Moon Bay. "But tradition still wins out in my book," I said, smiling up at him. We paused outside the passenger side of his car and exchanged a long look that made my heart flutter. Tension pulsed between us and neither one of us moved, as if we didn't want to break the spell. Finally, Peter opened the door for me and I hopped in. Once we were both inside the car with the hum of the engine running and the doors closed to ward off the cold, I became very aware of how alone we were at that moment. And how cozy. I was sitting here in this car with the man who might be on the brink of stealing my family's business out from under me and changing everything about my dad's beloved store. For a moment, I considered telling Peter the truth and asking him for leniency. But I didn't want to ruin this night. It had been the most fun I'd had in a long time, and the thought of talking business was a total downer. I may need a little more convincing yet about tradition, he said, the corner of his mouth tipping up as he tapped his finger against his chin. Like how? I asked, noticing his gaze lower to my mouth. I felt that palpable tension pulsing between us again and licked my bottom lip. His eyelids became hooded and I felt an invisible cord pulling me toward him, making me lean forward just a little. Like this, he murmured in reply. He brushed my cheek with his fingertips before resting them under my chin as he leaned in and placed his mouth on mine. The feel of his mouth against mine made butterflies dance in my belly. I felt helpless to resist him, not that any part of me wanted to. A moment later, his tongue slipped into my mouth and danced with mine, making my belly do a cartwheel. Oh, my! His hand slid to the back of my head and rested at the nape of my neck. Our mouths melted together and suddenly that hole in my heart didn't feel as big anymore. Guilt immediately washed through me. I pulled back at once, thinking of my dad, and wondering how I could feel so happy with Peter at a time like this. I'm sorry, I said, shaking my head and fighting not to meet his gaze. I should just. I'm going to walk home from here. What? Why? He asked, his voice low. I just need to, Peter. Thank you for dinner. Good night. I clambered out of the car and closed the door behind me, feeling unsteady on my feet. Inhaling a lungful of air, I tried to center myself. What was going on? Okay, I was obviously attracted to Peter, that much was clear. Plus, the man knew how to kiss like nobody's business. Wowzers! But that wasn't what this night was supposed to be about. I needed to get Peter to see my point of view about tradition, so that if we sold the store to him then I'd have laid the groundwork for keeping our family's store the same as when my dad had run it. I turned my back on the car and swiftly began the walk home, hurrying down the path away from the road. My parents' house was a bit of a walk from here and it was super cold out tonight. Despite the chill in the air, my lips were warm and prickling where Peter had kissed me. Which was crazy. Because nothing was supposed to happen between us. We were supposed to have a simple dinner and that was it. As I walked home under the light of the moon, I tried to convince myself I only wanted to spend more time with Peter for the good of the store. But I didn't buy that reason in the slightest. The truth was there was a stirring in my heart I'd never felt before. And when I entered downtown and saw the Christmas lights, I found myself looking forward to seeing the inflatable Santas, which was crazy. I had no idea how to think of a future with Peter in it when I wasn't at all ready to let go of my past. I arrived home from my date with Peter 10 minutes later, bursting through the front door and heading straight for the gas fireplace in the living room, which was still switched on. I rubbed my hands together and crouched down, warming myself by the flames. You have a good night? Mom's voice came out of nowhere. Oh! I exclaimed, whipping around to see my mom sitting behind me on the leather recliner. I had told her I was going out with a friend tonight. Not a total lie. Definitely easier than the whole truth, too. I noticed dark circles that formed crescent moons under her eyes, as though she hadn't slept in weeks. I didn't realize you were up. I went to give her a hug, leaning down over the chair she was curled in. There was a stack of papers in her lap. I glanced down and recognized them as the contract Peter had sent her. My stomach tightened. This was such a mess. What was I even doing, thinking I could change the mind of a man like that? He might seem playful and fun, but he didn't get where he was without some serious hard work and hard edges. I was just looking over the contract again, she admitted. I think we're going to have to sell, Anna. I don't see any other choice. Just give the final decision a little time, okay? I asked, wanting her to wait without my sharing any of the details. I'm working on something. Dare I ask what? She managed a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. Top secret, I told her. Then I dropped a kiss to her temple. But bear with me, okay? I'm working hard here. A few more days is all I need. That's all we have, she said. My stomach nodded. I promise, Mom. I'm going to do everything I can to keep the store safe. And I meant it. She gave me another hug and got to her feet. I need to get some rest, she said, and patted my shoulder. See you tomorrow, I replied, watching her climb the stairs toward her bedroom, which left me alone in front of the fire, wondering what I was going to do about Peter and our family's business. And also wondering how my heart had ended up in the middle of it. Chapter 4. On Monday morning, I pushed the front door open to Carrie's kaleidoscope, carrying a latte for Carrie and one for me that I'd picked up from Bayside Coffee a couple blocks over. As I strode inside and back toward the counter, I glanced around her store, taking a second to remind myself just how much I loved this place. The frosted front window that looked out onto the street was edged with fairy lights from the inside. Dark wood finishing throughout the store made everything look cozy and quaint. This place had the same chill vibe that Carrie had, and was filled with creative and artistic handmade items as unique as my dear friend. I hadn't told Carrie about my date with Peter the other night, even though he was all I could think about. Was it good to have feelings for the man who wanted to purchase my beloved family store and turn it into some cheesy moneymaker? I think not. But my brain was having a hard time talking sense into my heart. It was time to confess to my bestie. Maybe she would be the voice of reason and could help me refocus on my goal. Peter was my business adversary, not exactly someone I should start dating. No matter how much I wanted to. Good morning, Carrie, I said, setting her cup of coffee on the checkout counter she was standing behind. Don't give me that good morning routine like it's just another day in Blue Moon Bay, she said, holding her index finger up and then making circling motions toward herself. I heard who you were out with on Saturday night. Start explaining. What needs explaining? I asked, raising my eyebrows at her and playing innocent. She lifted her cup and shook her head at me like she wasn't buying it. Okay, I was stalling. Every part of me knew it was time to come clean about my plan, so I may as well get to it. I leaned my elbows onto the counter, wrapped my fingers around the steaming cup of coffee and thought about my kiss with Peter. Dreamy sigh. Although I should have confided in Carrie about the mind-blowing kiss, I needed time to come to terms with what had happened. This morning, I decided to discuss my plan with Carrie and our other friend, Michelle, who was running late, as usual. Don't give me the innocent act, girl, Carrie said, shaking her head and laughing. You're carrying out some kind of scheme. I can tell by the look in your eyes. So, tell me every detail starting with why you were at Huntington's with Peter Locke. Go. It's kind of complicated, I said, unsure of where to start. When in doubt, take a long drink of latte. Gulp. The liquid warmed my insides and then I took a deep breath, looking across the counter at my friend. It's not a scheme, per se, but I do need your help too. What's this I hear about a scheme? Michelle's voice came from behind us. I turned and looked over my shoulder to see Michelle bustling through the front door holding a to-go tumbler, likely filled with her favorite mint tea. Michelle was tall, with banana blonde hair that fell straight past her shoulders and inquisitive gray-blue eyes. Her regal look and intellectual personality contrasted Carrie's petite dark-haired look and her quirky personality. We three had been friends since elementary school. I'd always been the practical one. Carrie was the quirky one. Michelle was the dramatic one. Our other friend, Claire, had been the romantic one, but she was down in Hollywood this week meeting with actress Verna D'Angelo, who ordered an original wedding dress from Forever Designs by Claire. Claire's fiancé, Alex, was spending the week down there with her. Too cute. There's no scheme, really, I said, shaking my head. Oh, don't play innocent just because Michelle is here now, Carrie protested. I think she needs to hear all about your scheme, too. I think I do. Michelle nodded enthusiastically and then gave me a one-armed hug as she joined me at the counter. Could use some inspiration for my next book. As long as I'm not in it, I joked, since Michelle was a writer and working on a novel. But neither of you are allowed to tell anyone what I'm about to tell you. This has to stay completely between the three of us. Agreed? Of course, Michelle said, eyeing me with interest. Come on, spill. You've got me all invested now. Anna is trying to seduce Peter Locke, Carrie butted in, clearly unable to hold herself back. Hey, I never said seduce. I protested. Yeah, but you're totally dating him, Carrie teased. That's close enough, isn't it? Not even, I shot back. We just spent a little time together, that's all. Conversation over a meal. No big deal. And what exactly is the point of having dinner with that gorgeous man if you're not dating him? Michelle asked, looking confused. I rubbed the heel of my hand over my face, feeling kind of underhanded. I'm hanging out with Peter because I'm trying to find a way to make sure nothing bad happens to the mini-mart. Oh, yeah, what's going on with your store? Michelle looked at me sympathetically, squeezing my arm. I know you guys were having some trouble with it. Yeah, we are. I sighed heavily. Big trouble. It looks as though we're going to have to sell the mini-mart. And get this, the best offer on the table right now is from Peter Locke. Well, that figures. Michelle rolled her eyes, tucking a strand of her blonde hair back behind her ear. He's been buying up pretty much everything in town. He's turning the whole place into a tourist trap. Or, at least that's what I hear. I shook my head, feeling defensive of Peter. He honestly thinks he's doing the town a service by infusing fresh ideas. He doesn't know that I know he's going after my family's store or that I'm hanging out with him so he'll keep the store the same. Well, that sounds very conniving to me, Michelle said, wagging her finger at me. But also pretty clever considering you're only trying to do well by the mini-mart. How's the scheme going thus far? It's not a scheme, I said, wishing they'd stop calling it that. I thought back to Peter and my kiss outside the restaurant. There was a stirring of guilt inside me, telling me that I'd crossed the line on my plan. Or, more likely, I felt worried that our kiss had resulted from genuine feelings I hadn't anticipated entering into the equation. I had assumed I would be able to keep whatever feelings I had for him at bay, but that presumption was falling further and further away every time we saw each other. I guess the plan is going pretty well, though. We had dinner at Huntington's for our first, meeting. You were going to say date, weren't you? Carrie pointed at me triumphantly, as though she'd outed me. You're totally dating him. You like Peter Locke. Admit it. I'm not dating Peter, I said, shaking my head. I couldn't be dating Peter, because that would only complicate my situation. Our meetings are only about saving the mini-mart. What are you going to do if he finds out you're only seeing him for that reason? Michelle raised her eyebrows at me, and I fell silent for a moment. In all honesty, I hadn't thought that far ahead, and I was a little annoyed that she was making me consider all I wanted to avoid. I waved my hand dismissively. I'll figure that out when I get there. Right now, I just need to find a way to get back in touch with him. What do you mean? Carrie asked, furrowing her brow. She crossed her arms on the weathered counter, her elbow butting up against the vintage till she'd purchased with her first real profits from this place. Doesn't he have your phone number? Or vice versa? No, I left in kind of a hurry after dinner, I said, biting my bottom lip. Didn't have time to get his number or anything. That's why I need your help. You left in a hurry, huh? Overwhelmed by your feelings, no doubt? Michelle teased, and I shot her a look. Yeah, something like that, I replied, not wanting to acknowledge what my besties already seemed to have guessed, that I had feelings for Peter Locke. I'm planning to drop by his office, but I want to bring him something as an excuse. Something to show him that I want to see him again. Carrie looked around the store, casting her gaze over the trinkets displayed on every shelf. Your goal is to convince him to keep the mini-mart old school, right? Yeah, that's the plan. I nodded as she grabbed my hand, emerged from behind the counter and led me across the room. So give him something old school to help reinforce that in his mind, Carrie suggested, bringing me to a halt next to a set of shelves and pointing out a painted schoolhouse on the bottom shelf. The schoolhouse did look old-fashioned, but it just didn't seem very Peter. My gaze drifted to the object sitting next to the schoolhouse, which was a ceramic Santa with a snow globe. Oh! This is the right gift for Peter. I picked up the big, beaming Santa Claus knick-knack, which had a snow globe as his belly. So clever! The details of the Santa were painted so perfectly that his eyes seemed to glisten with amusement. I shook the globe and then held it upright to watch the snow dance down over a cluster of reindeer. Did you hand-paint this Santa? Yes, I sure did, Carrie replied proudly as I held the snow globe up to show Michelle. She tilted her head at me, her blonde hair falling over one shoulder. What do you think of this as a gift? I asked her as she took a sip of her tea. I like it. She gave me a thumbs up. Kitschy. Hey, nothing I sell in this store is kitschy, Carrie protested, holding her palm up. Everything is to the very highest standard it can be. Oh, come on, that's total kitsch, Michelle teased as she came over to take a look at it, passing it between her hands. But that's what you're going for, isn't it, Anna? It's completely charming, I said, taking it to the counter and pulling out some cash to pay for it. Nope, not taking money from you today, Carrie said, waving the green bills away. My mouth dropped open. Come on, let me. Nope, not taking it, she replied firmly. This is my contribution to help out with the scheme or whatever you're calling it. Consider it a donation to the cause. I love the Main Street Mini-Mart. My heart warmed. Thanks, Carrie. I appreciate the gesture. Michelle nodded. Anything to help Anna seduce. Not seduce, I corrected her. This is just an excuse to see him again. Get to know him a little better. And, more importantly, get him to know that the mini-mart is perfect as is, I said, my brow immediately crinkling. Perfect, except for the mountain of debt. Whatever you say, Michelle said, wearing a smug smile. I'll keep you guys updated, I promised them both, finishing up the last of my coffee and then dumping the cup into the trash can next to the counter. You're leaving? Michelle asked as I tucked the white bag with the snow globe into my purse. Yep, I'm going to head down to the offices Peter has downtown, I replied. And I'm going to give him this and convince him that he needs to let me show him around properly. Show him around you? Carrie teased, and I opened my mouth to protest, but she lifted her hands at once. I know, you're not trying to date him, she conceded. Just let me have my fun, all right? I think you've had quite enough of that for now, I said, rolling my eyes. I'm just going to Peter's office to talk to him. And to apologize for running away from our date after he kissed me. Good luck, Carrie said, waving me off. Yeah, good luck, Michelle echoed. Thanks. I smiled at them both before I headed for the door. I stepped outside, took a deep breath and let the cool morning air wash over me. I could do this. I could totally do this. I just had to focus on the mini-mart, on my family, and not on the way Peter's mouth had felt against mine on that cold winter evening we had spent together. Chapter 5. 20 minutes later, I stood outside the offices of Peter Locke, wriggling my toes inside my shoes and trying to work up the nerve to push open the door and walk in there. So far, I hadn't moved. Come on, Anna. Don't chicken out now. Do you need help? A woman asked. I spun around to find a woman around my age standing behind me wearing an expectant expression and looking a little weirded out by the fact that I was just hanging outside the office of the most powerful man in Blue Moon Bay. Oh, sure, I stumbled over my words with my heart beating a mile a minute. I'm here to see Peter Locke? Me, too. She grinned, pushed open the front door and held it for me. Don't wait out there in the cold. It's warm and cozy inside. Thanks, I said, and walked into the lobby. My toes were still wriggling inside my shoes from nerves, but at least I'd come out of the cold. Progress. I glanced around the lobby, reality finally hitting me of just how much money this guy had. The reception area had floor-to-ceiling windows that let the morning light filter through and had an incredible view of the ocean. The chairs in the waiting area were leather and modern. I had to admit the office was impressive. May I help you? The man behind the reception desk asked. I blinked and realized I didn't have so much as an appointment. I had just strolled in here hoping to talk to the boss like it was nothing. What if he was busy, in a meeting, or just plain annoyed that I showed up here unannounced? Yikes! I'm here to see Peter? I blurted out, wanting to roll my eyes for saying it like a question. I mean, Peter Locke. I am, too, the woman who'd held the door open came up beside me. I'm Andrea Rankin from next door. He turned to me. And you are? I'm Anna, I said, watching as he waited for me to say my last name like Andrea had. Nope, not going to happen, buddy. I'll see if he's available, the receptionist finally said as he eyed both of us, picked up the phone, and then paused as he waited for Peter to pick up. In the silver-framed mirror behind the reception desk, I saw Andrea fluffing her hair and straightening her skirt. I couldn't help noticing how pretty she looked, and Peter was sure to notice that, too. What exactly was she doing here? Mr. Locke will be right out, the receptionist said, hanging up the phone. He nodded at the two of us, but I could tell that he was taken aback by our appearance here. Andrea straightened, and I self-consciously checked my clothes. Should I have dressed up? My green sweater was nice enough, but my khaki pants were the epitome of casual. Peter emerged from a door behind the reception desk, looking positively handsome in a navy suit with a pale blue shirt underneath that made him fit neatly into his surroundings. My heart skipped a beat and the memory of our kiss immediately played inside my head. His eyes connected with mine and his face lit up. Hey, he said, striding across the room and greeting me with a kiss on the cheek. I could feel irritation coming off Andrea in waves. Oh. Was it possible they were dating? What a wonderful surprise to see you here. I opened my mouth to respond. Well, I had to pay you a visit, Andrea cut in, as though he'd been talking to her. Peter turned toward her. Hello, Ms. Rankin, was it? Andrea from next door. She reached out to touch his arm flirtatiously. We met last week in the parking lot. I was hoping we could schedule that meeting you and I talked about. He paused for a moment as if he wasn't sure what she meant. Sure, we can schedule a meeting. If you would please check in with Wayne, then he'll be able to let you know my schedule and can work out a time. Maybe we could meet over dinner, she asked, fluttering her lashes at him. I felt a jolt of jealousy. Was there any chance Peter wanted to date this woman who obviously was interested in him? I held my breath, waiting for his response. My regular office hours are until 5, he replied, gesturing toward the reception desk. Again, if you'll check with Wayne, then he can pencil you in. Take care. I exhaled with relief. He didn't seem interested in her at all. Phew. I knew I shouldn't care who he dated, but for some reason I did. Big time. She flashed a smile in his direction before walking toward the front desk. I'll be seeing you soon, she told him, her voice laced with promise. I rolled my eyes. The lady needed to learn the art of subtlety. My goodness. Plus, she didn't seem right for him. He needed someone who was less flirtatious and more practical. Yes, he definitely needed a woman who could balance out his impulsive side. It wasn't lost on me that my personality would be perfectly suited for that role. Peter watched her stop in front of the reception desk as his eyebrows came together, and then he finally shook his head. Turning to me, he smiled. Then he placed a hand on my elbow and led me through the door he'd come through earlier and into his office. I tried to ignore how good his hand felt on me and how nice it was to be near him again. While he closed the door behind us, I looked around and took the place in. His office was even more impressive than the entrance area. The office was decorated in a minimalist but modern style that seemed to suit Peter perfectly. This room had the same enormous windows, but the view was even more dramatic from this angle. My gaze flew from the beach to the bluffs behind the inn and then to the ocean waves crashing against the shore. Breathtaking. So, what brings you here today? He leaned against the door and lifted a hand. Not that I'm complaining. Well, I found myself sputtering, trying to recall why I'd come to Peter's office besides that pull of wanting to see him again. Oh! I suddenly remembered the gift in my bag, which was my excuse to come here. I reached into my purse, pulled out the gift bag and handed it to him. I brought a peace offering, I said, biting my bottom lip as my cheeks heated. To make up for my abrupt exit after dinner. Really? You didn't have to do that. He took the white bag from me, which was emblazoned with Carrie's kaleidoscope in a rainbow of colors. He reached in the bag, pushing aside the white tissue Carrie had wrapped the knick-knack in, and then pulled out the hand-painted Santa. His face lit up immediately and a smile grew across his handsome face. Well, this is pretty cool. You really like it? I asked, feeling a bit shy about the gift. But it had suited him so perfectly that I couldn't resist. The Santa made me think of that story you told me about your dad dressing up as Santa every year. When I saw it, I felt like it had been made just for you. I love it, Anna, he said, smiling as if I'd given him the grandest of gifts. Thank you. I held my hands up. I really wanted to make up for my rudeness, running off like that. Please don't read too much into that. I really had a good time with you at dinner. Don't read too much into your hasty exit, huh? All right, he placed the globe on the edge of his desk and stared at it for a moment before turning back to me. Would you be interested in going out with me again? Not as interested as Andrea seemed, I said, twisting my mouth to the side. He chuckled. She does come on a bit strong. Tempted to take her up on it? I asked, and then wanted to kick myself. It wasn't any of my business who he dated. But a big part of me had to know the answer. Unless a better option comes along, I might have no choice, he said, sighing deeply, as though it was some great pain to him to admit. I giggled, tucked a loose strand of hair back behind my ear, and then realized I was flirting. I dropped my hand to my side. Amazing place you have here, I said, gesturing at the view out the windows. Yeah, I didn't move to a beach town to miss a view of the ocean, he replied, turning to cast his gaze out over the water beyond. Sunlight danced on the glistening waves in coin-sized flashes of light. Haven't had a chance to get out on the ocean yet, though. Do you sail? I asked. Sometimes, he said, leaning back against his desk. I don't have a boat here yet, though. There's actually this wonderful dinner cruise run by a company at the pier, I said, thinking of the good things I'd heard about it. It's definitely a tourist attraction, but it's a nice option if you want to get out on the ocean. Would you like to go on the dinner cruise with me? He asked, sounding very optimistic for a guy whose date practically ran away from him Saturday night. Well, if we're on the boat then I can't make a hasty escape, I replied playfully. My pulse picked up at the thought of a whole evening alone with him. I had never taken the dinner cruise myself, but the thought of sharing it with him actually sounded pretty fun. I heard they have the boat decked out with Christmas decorations, too. How about tomorrow night, he suggested. I mean, if the dinner cruise isn't booked full already. I laughed. There aren't nearly as many tourists around here this time of year. Wait until next year, he said, tapping my nose playfully. I'll bring them in. Right, I replied, twisting my hands around one another. I almost forgot this was the man who looked at this town and saw opportunity. So, you up for it? He asked, his eyebrows lifting as he gave me a side glance. Absolutely, I said, feeling the corners of my mouth curve upward. Pick me up at the Christmas tree in the town square? Where else? He grinned and showed me to the door. I'm looking forward to it. Me, too, I said, my belly doing a little flip. I brushed by him to get out the door and was suddenly distinctly aware of how close he was standing to me. So close that I could just lean up and press my mouth to his once more. I knew I should resist, but it felt so good to be near him again. I found myself lingering dangerously close, my gaze on his lips, feeling so tempted to just. Peter, the receptionist's voice chirped from the speaker on the desk. I snapped out of my trance, taking a step back. What's up, Wayne? Peter asked, looking frustrated by the interruption. This was my cue to skedaddle. I wiggled my fingers at him and then ducked out the door. Tomorrow night. I'd see Peter again tomorrow night. I should be focusing solely on bending his ear. Instead, I found myself smiling at the thought of another evening with him. Whatever happened tomorrow night would happen. Chapter 6. The next evening, Peter picked me up in the town square at our agreed-upon time. He looked more handsome than ever, dressed in a well-cut suit, with a fresh aftershave and an air of confidence like life was going exactly the way he wanted. I had dug out a dress from one of my unpacked moving boxes, a black cocktail dress with silver detail on the hem. I also unpacked the biggest coat I could find, even if that did take away from the pretty effect. As we approached the pier, I studied the boat, which was a classic-looking vessel that had clearly been around a couple of generations by now. People were already piling on, wrapped up in coats against the cold, and who was I to say no? With the starry sky above us, I took Peter's arm and we walked toward the wooden ramp leading onto the boat. Christmas music came from speakers above the cabin. A few couples were already swaying happily together on the deck, seeming to revel in their last little bit of time together before the holidays got too crazy busy and in the way of anything close to romance. There were small, old-fashioned lanterns strung around the open deck, and an indoor area where dinner would be served later. The water surrounding the boat looked nearly black, speckled with the reflection of the stars above. The festive scene could have been plucked from a classic romance flick, and it made me feel giddy to be here with Peter. Not that I'd planned on a romance with him, but it seemed to be all I could think about now. "Ready to get off dry land?" Peter asked, slipping his hand around mine as we stepped onto the wooden ramp. I gave him a side glance. "I'm definitely ready." "Then let's see what this cruise has in store for us," he said, grinning. "Just to warn you," I said, leaning over toward Peter. "I've never been much of a dancer." Dancing had always been better suited to Claire and her classic moves, Carrie and her lack of inhibitions on the dance floor, or Michelle who seemed to move with ease. For me, dancing had always felt awkward. Like the beat had escaped me, or something. "In that case, I'm going to have to insist on a dance," he said, grinning at me. "There's nothing you can't do, Anna. The trick is not taking the dance floor too seriously." I stepped back, holding my palms up. "What? You're saying you still want me to dance with you? After you've already been warned?" "We have to work up an appetite before dinner, don't we?" he said, just as the boat pulled away from the pier. A goofy smile stayed on my face as I stared at him for a long moment, before he took my coat and hung it on the coat rack inside the cabin. Then he took my hand. "You asked for it," I said, as he pulled me closer. I inhaled the scent of his aftershave, which made my legs turn gooey. "Don't blame me if your feet get stepped on." "It would be worth it," he said, slipping his arm around my waist and then resting his hand securely on my lower back. We moved to the music with the other couples in the cabin while White Christmas by Bing Crosby played over the speakers. The music was sweet and soft, seeming to envelop us. Before I knew it, we were swaying to the music perfectly in sync. Everything and everyone around us seemed to drift away, and we were swept into this little cocoon with just the two of us. As the boat hummed and rocked on the water, we continued moving together, my hand on his shoulder and the other in his warm hand as if it had been made to belong there. At this point, I did my best to refocus on my goal here. I had to save the mini-mart. That was the most important thing. But then he tilted his head slightly so his mouth brushed against my neck, and all business thoughts fell away. Peter felt so strong, so stable in the mess of what was happening in my life. Even if he didn't know it, he was my one solid thing in the face of a storm. I suddenly wanted to take this night to pretend that storm had fallen away for a while. I found myself pulling back a little, just to look up into those green eyes for a moment. But his head was lowered and he wasn't meeting my gaze. He appeared lost in the music. I felt the sparkle run through my system as I took in the man in front of me. It felt as though Peter and I were connected on some fundamental level by the loss of our dads. I had no idea what to make of that. And it felt strange that I wouldn't even be here if he wasn't trying to buy my family business from underneath me. How could such a harsh truth bring me to such a wonderful moment? My life was such a mess that I didn't want this song to ever end. And if you'll take a look to your left, ladies and gentlemen, a crackly voice came through the speakers, cutting off the music. Jared from my spell, I pulled back from Peter. I couldn't let myself fall any further into wherever my feelings were taking me. It could only end in heartache. A dozen or so other people swarmed to the left side of the boat, peering over the edge and past the water to the dramatic bay beyond. "You can see the inn at Blue Moon Bay," the man continued, using an official tone. "This is the birthplace of the Kissed by the Bay legend, which is known and beloved by all of the townsfolk in Blue Moon Bay." There was a mutter of delight amongst the crowd. The couples around us exchanged glances and fluttered their lashes at each other. Peter turned to me, his eyebrow raised. "You've heard of the Kissed by the Bay legend?" he asked, and I remembered Carrie telling me that he was fascinated by the legend. Just a bit of old folklore, I replied, wondering what it was about the legend that Peter found so interesting. It's an old romantic story, I said, waving my hand. I think love is about more than one lucky moment under the sky. Nothing magical about that, I don't think. He followed me out to the deck where they had started to serve drinks. A waiter strode by, wearing a red coat and a white shirt and handing out glasses of wine. Peter lifted a glass from the tray. Maybe you and I should visit the plaque together and do some investigating of our own. We definitely should, I said, accepting the glass of wine he'd plucked from the tray and held out to me. In the spirit of showing you the town's most beloved traditions. There's a lot Blue Moon Bay has to offer. He lifted another glass from the tray, nodded to the server, and then flashed me a smile. I felt that sparkle again, and I did my best to ignore it. I couldn't let this get to me. I couldn't let him get to me. No matter how charming he was, no matter how sweet, no matter how effusively enthusiastic and funny and handsome. This dinner cruise has been around for as long as I can remember, I said, gesturing around the boat. When I was younger, I would watch the boat and wonder what it would be like to be on it. It's the stable things in life that really make us feel rooted, you know? He sipped his wine, as if taking a moment to think before answering me. Is the cruise everything you thought it would be? It's lovely, I said, thinking the best part was that I was here with him. But then I imagined what it would be like if he changed the mini-mart so that it was unrecognizable to my family, all in the name of injecting new life into it and making it more profitable, of course. Shudder. Do you have the urge to buy the boat and make changes? Or is the cruise too low-key for someone like you? Some things are perfect the way they are, Anna, he said, keeping his gaze on mine, and a little zing zipped through my belly. I shifted closer to him. What was it about his presence and the strength of being close to him? I felt as though we were being drawn together, like my whole life I had been plummeting towards that first meeting with him. You think you're going to stay in Blue Moon Bay? I asked, wondering if he'd get bored with our small beach town once he'd infused it with the changes he wanted. His head tilted. Why wouldn't I? I figure you might head back to the city, eventually. I gestured with my wine glass, as if in the direction of some far-off place in need of his updating. You know, to find more businesses that you feel need changing. My life isn't all about work, you know. There are other compelling reasons to stay in Blue Moon Bay, which don't have anything to do with businesses, he said, his voice laced with flirtation. My belly warmed and I knew it had nothing to do with the wine. Don't you think? I suppose so, I shrugged, playing it as cool as I could. My heart pounded in my chest and I wondered what exactly was going on between us. Our conversations weren't typical for first dates. It felt more like treading on unknown ground where I'd never been but where every part of me wanted to go. You still haven't told me what you do for a living, he said, taking a sip of wine. I'm surprised you didn't use all your fancy technology to check up on me, I teased, hoping he'd drop the subject since I was currently working at the mini-mart. He rolled his eyes and laughed. I'm not in the habit of doing a background check on the woman I'm dating. So we're dating now? We had dinner at Huntington's and if you count the Christmas tree lighting then this makes date number 3. And I definitely count it. I suppose we'll have to check in with the advisory board and see, I teased, loving the way his eyes softened as he laughed along with me. Whether I liked it or not, this was a date and it was going pretty well, despite all of my reservations. Why aren't you into the Kissed by the Bay legend? Everyone else seems enthralled by it, including me, he said. I just feel like the legend is for superstitious people. I looked upward at the starry sky above me. It doesn't actually mean anything if there's a blue moon in the sky when a couple shares a kiss. You have to agree with me on that. After everything that's happened lately, I'm open to a bit of superstition, he replied softly, and I saw a brief sadness flit across his face. I related to how he felt. After my dad passed away, I tried so many bargains with the universe to try and bring him back. Who am I to reason with why the world operates the way it does? Maybe you're right, I said, wishing I could make sense of it all. Life, death, love. Wait, love? Clearly, talking about legends and dancing was getting me way ahead of myself. I hadn't been in love with anyone since my college boyfriend. We were together for 6 months when he graduated and moved to the East Coast for graduate school. It had made sense to break up, and other than a few weeks of crying in my pillow, I'd never really looked back. I took another sip of my wine and glanced over at the inn once more. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been down to the monument that held the Kissed by the Bay legend. I mean, that place was for true love, and I'd never dated anyone in this town who matched that description for me. Plenty of my more sentimental friends had, like Claire, who was now engaged and blissfully happy. Maybe I should open myself up to a little bit of sentimentality. My emotions were still raw, though, so it was hard to believe happiness could ever shine over the pain of losing my dad. "You okay?" he asked, and I realized a tear had run down my cheek. I brushed it away with the back of my hand and nodded. "Yeah," I assured him, forcing a small smile. "It's just hard." "I know," he said, taking my hand and pressing a kiss to the inside of my wrist. Then he brushed his thumb back and forth over my knuckles. "It gets easier." "Does it?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. He gave a sad smile. "That's what they say." I'm sure hoping it does. For the first time since I'd arrived back in Blue Moon Bay, a wave of peace washed over me. So much had been in flux the last few weeks. But standing here looking into Peter's green eyes, and knowing he felt the same way, something clicked into place. Something that filled me with a comfort I didn't know I'd been lacking. The feeling soothed me. I wanted to spend the rest of the night in this moment, seeing myself reflected in this man, and wondering if maybe he and I would find a way through our struggles together. But, after a moment, he pulled his gaze from mine and turned it out onto the water beyond us. He moved back towards the railing, and I followed him. "My dad loved the ocean," he said. "He'd have enjoyed a cruise like this if he were here." "My dad would have enjoyed the cruise, too," I said, even though I didn't remember him or my mother ever going on this dinner cruise. Really, it was mostly for tourists, which was strange. Why wouldn't everyone in town enjoy this serene ride? My dad liked to go fishing out here sometimes. When I was a kid, he used to take my brother and me, but I was never any good at it. Eventually, I stopped going and just the boys would go. I was always pretty squeamish as a kid, he confessed with a slightly wry smile. I think my dad would have liked it if I could have been a good fisherman, but I always made him throw them back into the ocean as soon as we caught them. "Sounds like our dads would have gotten along well," I remarked, and he turned to me and smiled, as though it was the first time the thought had crossed his mind. "Yeah, it really feels like they would have," he agreed. It felt good to talk about my dad. Back home, it felt as though his name had been turned into a sad word, stirring up memories that were still too fresh for all of us to handle. But here, with Peter, we could both talk about our dads, which seemed way too painful to do with anyone else. "I wonder if they'll be serving dinner soon." I worked through lunch. "Didn't you hear?" I asked, giving him a deadpan look. "You have to fish for your own dinner tonight. It's part of the whole ocean cruising experience." He stared at me a moment, and then laughed. "Nice one, Anna." For a moment there, scenes from Adrift flashed through my head. "No, you're safe," I said, loving the look of pure joy that crossed his face. You won't have to ask me to throw any fish back into the ocean for your squeamish self. Good to hear, he said, continuing to smirk at me as if he hadn't known I could crack a joke. I loved that I'd caught him by surprise. Finally, he ran his hands through his hair and gestured to the cabin where the rest of the small crowd were beginning to make their way into what looked like a buffet dinner. Shall we? He asked, offering me his arm. I happily wrapped my fingers around his muscular arm. I think we shall, I said. And I had a feeling I was agreeing to more than just the dinner. Chapter 7. 2 days later, I stood in the back office at the Main Street Mini-Mart, glaring at my brother while my mom stared at her hands, which were neatly folded on the table. We'd had many conversations at this table over the years and many breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, but that was all coming to an end. I didn't want to hear that, either. Part of me knew I was in denial, but the other part of me preferred to stay that way. I just don't see that we have a choice anymore, Chuck said, pinching the bridge of his nose and wincing. My brother sounded exhausted and defeated. But that didn't stop the denial part of me from freaking out on him. Of course we have a choice, I exclaimed, thrusting my arms out in both directions. We don't have to sign those papers. We never have to. There's nothing that says. There's plenty that says, Anna. Mom reached over and squeezed my arm, the weariness in her voice reminding me how hard we'd fought to keep the mini-mart. Deep down, I knew my brother was doing his best under the devastating circumstances we'd been dealt. The bill collectors are going to take the business from us if we don't sell. We have no other choice. If we sell, we'll at least walk away debt-free and with some retirement money, she said. I just need a little more time, I pleaded. What for? She asked, her eyes wide as she looked over at me from her seat at the table where she had papers spread out before her, including bills. Lots of bills. Oh, so many bills. I hesitated for a moment. Should I tell her about my plan to convince Peter not to make a single change to the store in the name of tradition? Neither of them had a clue about my plan since I figured it was better not to involve them in such a scheme as Michelle had put it. Maybe I should come clean, but it felt wrong that I'd been spending time with Peter for any reason other than that he was a wonderful guy. I felt so confused. Ugh. I slumped down into the chair next to my mom, rubbed my hands over my face, and then stared at the contract laid out on the table. I couldn't believe it had come to this. I couldn't believe we were really selling the mini-mart. Are you sure there's nothing else we can do? I asked, gazing into her eyes and searching for any semblance of hope. But she just looked tired, as though she wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed and not come out for a month. I could relate to how she felt. Trying to hold on to the store and keep the creditors at bay for the last month had taken its toll on me, too. This was supposed to be the season of joy, and yet we'd been dealing with so much grief. We couldn't even attempt to immerse ourselves in the comfort of Christmas with all of this debt hanging over our heads, either. Instead, the three of us had been running on adrenaline, trying to keep one step ahead of foreclosure. But now it was clear we wouldn't have the cash we needed and we'd run out of time. I'm sure there's no other way, Anna, Mom replied gently. I felt a lump swell in my throat, tears threatening. I looked away from her before I started bawling on the spot. Something inside of me screamed that I couldn't give up on my dad's dream. I still had an in with Peter, didn't I? And that was something, no matter how small. But then I glanced at the defeat evident in Chuck's eyes. My brother seemed to have accepted the situation. My mom had accepted it. Now I needed to do the same. Fine, I said, swiping at the tears leaking down my cheeks. If that's what you think we have to do. Trust me, if there was another way then we would do it. My mother shot me a look of helplessness that broke my heart. The final bills are due and we don't have the money to pay them. Unless you have a small fortune tucked away somewhere I don't know about. I don't, I confessed, unable to laugh at her joke. It's time, Chuck said, and then he leaned over and gave my shoulder a squeeze. He was a man of few words, and even less physical affection, so I knew that this was his way of trying to assure me that everything was going to be all right. We still had each other, but maybe it was time to let Dad go. I didn't want to. We have to sign. Mom returned her gaze to the papers in front of her, leafed through the contract and then reached for a pen. Maybe the buyer won't change too much about the mini-mart. Maybe we can even keep working there. It could be like nothing's changed at all. We'll just have to wait and see. There was such hope in her voice that I didn't want to burst it, even though I knew the chances of keeping the mini-mart the same were next to nothing. Peter would inject new life into the mini-mart, just like he was doing with everything else. I exchanged a glance with my brother, who pressed his lips together and shook his head. Chuck and I had talked earlier. He'd noticed what had been going on around town. He knew as well as I did that Peter Locke wasn't purchasing everything he could get his hands on with the intention of keeping it all the same. Peter was going to change the mini-mart up, beyond anything that we could recognize, and then what? Then, the last connection we had to Dad would completely disappear. All the three of us would have left is our memories of him. Everything that Dad poured his life into would drift away with this sale. It's decided. I'm signing the papers, Mom announced firmly, and, before I could stop her, she began scribbling her name on the contracts. I had the strong urge to snatch the pen out of her hand and throw it across the room. Seriously, I had to fight to hold myself back as the pain ripped through me. But I couldn't deny it anymore. We had tried everything, and we'd come up short. Hot tears poured down my cheeks as she initialed page after page of the contract. As I watched her, with my chest tighter than I ever thought possible, I thought of my attempts to convince Peter to keep the mini-mart the same. My mind raced back to that first night when I chased Peter down at the Christmas lighting ceremony and waxed onto him about tradition amongst those forever jolly Santas. Next, I remembered our dinner together at Huntington's when I'd opened up to him about losing my dad and then discovered he'd lost his dad, too. And I thought of our date on the boat, the way he'd easily coaxed me into dancing with him and how natural it felt being in his arms and swaying to the music. Not awkward at all. Peter and I had joked together, smiled together, and gotten to know each other. My efforts on behalf of tradition should feel hollow in retrospect, knowing now that I had failed, but, somehow, thoughts of Peter filled me with warmth and comfort. You don't have to deliver the contract right away, do you? I asked, touching my mom's shoulder. No, I don't think I could bear that today. She shook her head and inhaled a shaky breath. I'll hold off until tomorrow. I want the Main Street mini-mart to be ours for one last day. We all fell silent, glancing out from the back room and into the store beyond. How many memories had we made in this place? How many memories of Dad were tied up between these shelves? So many happy times, but there wouldn't be any more. Ever again. Oh, Anna, Mom's voice wavered and then she leaned toward me. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close as she pressed her forehead to my shoulder and sobbed. Sharp pain stabbed my heart from watching my mom break down like this. She knew how many hours I'd put in at the store since I'd been back, and without any pay, but I wanted to tell her everything about my plan with Peter and how I'd really tried. I'd tried so hard. Suddenly, a spark of hope zipped through me. My mom wouldn't take the papers in until tomorrow, so I could still make one last-ditch effort with Peter. Time was up now, which meant dropping the pretense of dating once and for all and coming out with the truth. It will get easier, Mom, I murmured against her shoulder, remembering the words Peter had said to me. I wanted my mom to feel the same sense of peace I'd felt from Peter's strength. I promise it will. And in that moment, I meant it, with every fiber of my being. I had one more opportunity to make it right for my family. I pictured all of those jolly, red, inflatable decorations hanging downtown and knew what I had to do. It was time to open up to Santa and tell him exactly what I wanted for Christmas. Chapter 8. The next afternoon, I dropped by Peter's office and invited him out for a treat, which wasn't hard to convince him to do, workday or not. He seemed delighted with my offer, reached for my hand, and I smiled, realizing how I'd gotten used to liking this. The conversation with my family the night before had been the inspiration for where I was taking him. Together, we walked along the downtown sidewalk. We were going to the gelato parlor my dad used to take Chuck and me to when we were kids. Gelato? You can't be serious. Peter laughed, squeezing my hand as I led him down the block. At this time of year? Giovanni's Gelato is the best place in town, I said, loving the feel of Peter's hand wrapped around mine. I'm proving to you that old school is best. Yeah, but what good will that do us when we freeze from the inside out? He glanced down at me with a mischievous look on his face. It would be worth it, I assured him. Trust me. Guess I'm going to have to, he said, wearing that same wide grin I'd seen when I had walked into his office, looking as though his face might split in two. Here we are. I came to a halt outside the old place, and my smile grew until I saw the sign sitting in the window. Going out of business? I gasped. My heart dropped. How long had this place been around? For as long as I'd been able to stand up straight, that was for sure. Another part of this town was being taken away from me. It's open now, right? We should go in. Peter rubbed his hands together, as if he couldn't wait to try this gelato I'd raved about on our walk. Giovanni's Gelato apparently won't be around for much longer, though, I said, waiting as Peter pulled the door open before we slipped inside. Oh, Anna. So nice to see you, an enthusiastic female voice said. I looked up to see Rosa Giovanni standing behind the counter. I'd been friends with Rosa's daughter in high school, so Rosa had offered up many free gelatos to me over the years. She'd always loved this store. It broke my heart that it would be closing. Hi, Rosa, I greeted her, with a sad smile. I'm sorry to see the store is going out of business. It's true, she tilted her head and shrugged in a what can you do manner. Unfortunately, we can't afford to keep the place going anymore. You understand how business is going lately, with your... Yes, I can imagine what that would be like. I coughed and gave her a meaningful look to indicate that we should drop any talk of my family's business for the time being. This is my friend Peter. I've bragged to him about your amazing gelato. I hadn't expected, well... Your selection looks amazing, Peter said, saving me from having to speak through the lump that had formed in my throat. He took a step toward the counter. Under the glass partition, a dozen flavors were laid out with loving care. I glanced around the place. Everything looked just as it had when my dad used to bring me here, from the red-painted wood on the walls to the worn red leather booths. Even though it was the afternoon, the place was empty. I felt my heart sink as I realized it had probably been like this all year round. How many other businesses like ours were facing the chopping block? What's your pleasure today? Rosa straightened, her smile seeming genuine. I'd love a scoop of the salted caramel, please, I said, my mouth watering at the thought of that cold, sugary-filled delight. Make it 2 scoops, actually. I'll have 1 scoop of the salted caramel and 1 scoop of the coffee, please, Peter said, his green eyes looking very excited. Rosa eyed him for a moment over the counter, her eyes squinting as though she were trying to place where she'd seen him before. But then she shook her head, glanced away, and proceeded to prepare our scoops. A minute later, she handed our orders to us in red paper tubs with white plastic spoons. My heart twisted as I remembered how many times Chuck and I had come for gelato with Dad. Suddenly, Tears pricked the backs of my eyes, and I knew I had to get out of there before I started to cry. "Here, let me get this, Anna." Peter handed over a large bill, as I gave a quick wave to Rosa and then slipped out the door. I inhaled a lungful of cold air outside. After several more deep breaths, the feeling faded. There, that was better. I could hold myself together now. "You all right?" Peter asked, stepping outside and touching my arm. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied quickly. "Sorry about that. I just haven't been there without my dad in a long time. It's a weird feeling. I'm really sorry." "Doing it for the first time is always hard," he replied gently. "Don't beat yourself up. Maybe a walk by the beach would be nice?" "Sounds perfect," I said, marveling that he always seemed to know just what I needed. I looped my arm through his and we headed toward the ocean. We walked in silence for a little bit, my head filled with trips to Giovanni's Gelato with my dad and Chuck. "You know, I came down to Blue Moon Bay because of my mom," he said, surprising me. "She loves small towns. I think she would have raised me away from the city if she could have gotten my dad away from the business." "Well, sounds like he had that in common with my dad, who was a bit of a workaholic, too," I said, right before a knot formed in my stomach. What if Peter asked what kind of work my dad had done? I didn't have the heart to lie to him. I'd have to confess, and then what would he think of me for keeping that secret from him this whole time? "Sounds like our dads would have gotten along very well," he replied, seeming unaware of my internal torment. Why oh why couldn't I have met Peter under different circumstances? We came to a halt at a bench overlooking the ocean. "How did you end up so different from your dad?" I asked, taking a bite of my gelato. I was probably weird, but I liked cold food in the cold. Something about the melt of the dessert over my tongue, the salty sweet of the caramel, just worked in the biting chill outside. "I mean, you seem like you work hard, but it's not like I had a tough time dragging you away." "Maybe I just have my priorities straight," he said, taking a seat next to me on the bench and resting his arm behind me. "I know some folks here worry that I'm purchasing failing businesses for some nefarious purpose. But I'm actually trying to improve the town for everyone here. I don't want to make the same mistakes my dad did." "How do you mean?" I turned to him with interest. I'd assumed the same as everyone else, that his ventures were mostly about making money. But maybe I had been wrong. "My dad focused on making a profit," he continued. "And he did well as an honest businessman. But he never took the time to be involved in the community. My mom was good at that, and I always admired that about her. I'd like to combine my dad's sense of business with my mom's heart for the community. My hope is that the townspeople will learn to trust me in time." "That sounds like a noble goal," I said, unsure of what to make of that. I had been resisting Peter's purchasing the mini-mart so hard because the thought of handing our business over to some out-of-towner just to have him make changes for a fast profit had made my heart hurt. But maybe I'd been wrong about him. "It sounds like you're trying to do good." "You know what else would have been good?" he asked, as I spooned another taste of gelato into my mouth. "If my dad had moved us here when I was growing up." I glanced at him. "Why would that have been good?" "I would have met you sooner," he replied, and then leaned over and planted a kiss on my lips. His mouth was cold from the gelato, but somehow warmth spread throughout my whole body. I felt my toes curl in my boots, and I couldn't think about anything but how good it felt to be with this man. And how I'd completely fallen for him. Chapter 9. Chuck might be dropping off the signed contract to sell the Main Street mini-mart at Peter's office right this minute, which was all I could think about as Peter and I walked down the steps behind the inn at Blue Moon Bay toward the beach below. Our trip to Giovanni's Gelato had been a dismal failure. The fact that the store was closing down showed that things change, not that old school worked best. Poor Rosa. I felt terrible for her. I felt terrible for my family, too. Once Peter's office received the signed contract, there would be nothing I could do to keep us from losing the mini-mart. This was my last shot to get Peter on my side. I felt terrified I wasn't going to be able to pull it off. If you get washed out to sea, I'm not taking responsibility for it, Peter warned me playfully as he laced his fingers through mine. I'll be taking you with me, I shot back, hoping I could keep my voice light to match his. I wasn't sure if I was pulling it off. I'm glad we're finally going down here, he said, hopping off the final step onto the beach below and turning toward where the plaque bearing the legend was waiting for us. This was prime romance territory, even though my mind was on anything but romance at this moment. Or was it? Being with Peter sparked a lot of feelings and I had no idea what to do with them. Was I nervous more about losing the mini-mart, or more worried that our time together was about to come to an end? And how could I even be comparing the two? I knew you'd love visiting the plaque. I squeezed his hand, which felt strong and steady around mine. As always, he was a calming presence in the cold of this afternoon. You're getting to know me pretty well, aren't you? He smiled at me, making it obvious he had no idea he was purchasing the mini-mart from my family or, more importantly, that I wanted to convince him not to change a thing. How many times have you been down here with boyfriends? He asked, wearing a playful look even though there was also seriousness in his eyes. Honestly? Never. I find that surprising, he said, looking over at me with an incredulous look that made my legs feel weak. Are you all right? You seem a little tense. I'm fine. I waved my hand as we made a left down the beach. How many times had I been here with friends? Goofing off as a kid, sneaking out as a teenager. I hadn't come down here since I had returned to the town, but maybe that was because I hadn't much believed in the power of, well, anything, by this point. Let alone the love this spot on the bay claimed to represent. Something on your mind? He asked, squeezing my hand. I looked at him, wanting to spill everything that was going on to him. I could have been honest, once and for all. I could have told him the truth and come clean and hoped that he would understand. I opened my mouth, seriously considering it for a moment, and then looked away from him and shook my head. No, just a little cold, I replied, skipping out ahead of him, playing at the carefree woman I knew he wanted to be out with today. Come on, let me show you the plaque with the legend you find so intriguing. He followed close behind me as the waves lapped at the shore, and I was suddenly distinctly aware of how alone we were down here. It was so close to Christmas that people must be busy shopping, or making plans with family, or finishing decorations on their own houses. Whatever the reasons, nobody else seemed to be traipsing down the beach on this cold, wintry afternoon. I glanced over at him as he caught up with me, and my eye was drawn to his lips, the memory of his mouth against mine feeling heavy in my mind. I dragged my eyes away and turned my gaze to the bronze plaque set between the old, wooden pillars. Here it is. I gestured toward the plaque as he crouched down a little so he could read it. I couldn't count how many times I had taken in those words, run my fingers over the letters, which were raised against the metal of the plaque. There was a time when I was a teen that I had been convinced the Kissed by the Bay legend held some magical powers. But these days I knew better. Peter cleared his throat and read the words aloud, "One kiss, right here, under a blue moon will lead to love that lasts forever." A shiver rolled through me and I turned to stare out at the ocean, searching for a reason why a legend should possibly be able to bring two people together. Know the history of two young people, the daughter of locals and the son of summer guests, who fell helplessly in love at this very beach. When their parents discovered their relationship, they were forbidden to see each other. His parents felt the working girl was beneath their son and her parents feared the scandal could ruin their business. Business, I muttered. Seems to be the first thing on everybody's mind. Peter slipped an arm around me and pulled me closer until I was standing in front of him. Then he wrapped his arms around me, holding me against him in a way that made me feel sheltered and safe, before he continued, "But the night before the family was to return home, the son got a note to his sweetheart and they met here under the stars." I looked up at the gray sky, wondering what it would be like to be here at night with Peter. He glanced down at me and I pretended not to see that out of the corner of my eye. He continued, his voice a little slower this time, as though he didn't want this moment to end. He pleaded with her to wait a year for him to turn 18 and become a man, that until then they could write to each other in secret and he'd find a way for them to be together. The young girl knew their parents would never allow that to happen, though. She'd always obeyed her parents and wasn't strong enough to go against their wishes, even for the perfect love she shared with him. My vision blurred and I found myself settling back against Peter's chest, feeling like we could be the two people in this legend. Their romance did not end well. So, with broken hearts, they said goodbye to each other right here at this very spot. A blue moon hung in the night sky, illuminating their final kiss, and they promised to love each other always. Then they vowed that everyone who kissed at this exact point by the bay, under a blue moon, would be in love forever, and would never separate as they tragically had. He squeezed me tight and then turned me around to face him, looking me in the eye. "That's the most romantic story I've ever heard." He lifted my hand, planted a kiss on my wrist and studied me with such softness, a softness that seemed as though it could never come from the man who was trying to buy my family's business out from under us. "I don't think it's romantic." I shook my head. "It's far-fetched." "Oh, come on," he teased me, shifting a little closer. "It's a little romantic, right?" I shrugged. "It's a cute story. Nothing special." "Didn't realize you were such a cynic," he said, tracing circles on my knuckles with his thumb, leaving a trail of sparks everywhere he touched. "I'm not a cynic," I protested weakly. "I just don't think love comes because you kiss at the right spot at the right time." "Where does it come from then?" "I don't know," I said, wondering where these feelings I had for Peter came from. "But I do know that you have to work hard at relationships. Really hard." "I agree with you," he said, tilting his head at me in a way that made my heart pick up the pace. "You do?" I asked, watching him nod. I glanced away, knowing I should step back and tell Peter the truth about the mini-mart. But I didn't want to ruin this moment. I wanted to feel that mouth against mine again. And he was so close. "But it's worth a shot, right?" he whispered, lifting my chin until my gaze met his. "One kiss, right here? To seal it all?" "I guess it couldn't hurt," I agreed, unable to fight the feelings brewing inside me. The corner of his mouth turned upward and then he leaned down and brushed his lips across mine. The kiss was soft and sweet, making me feel as though my feet had lifted from the ground, so I was floating a few inches above the earth and the only thing that mattered was the feel of his mouth on mine. How safe Peter made me feel, how calm. He felt like home somehow, even though this was the very man trying to take the feeling of home away from me. He slipped his arms around my waist and pulled me close, and for that second I believed in the legend. I believed that we were sealing something eternal. I believed in love, that I could love him, that he could love me, and that the pain we both knew would draw us together instead of pull us apart. But when he pulled back, I returned to the real world again. There was nothing here, but Peter, me, and the secret between us. When I'd first seen him at the Christmas tree lighting ceremony, I never could have imagined this would turn into anything other than pragmatic business. But the warmth in my belly as his soft eyes met mine told me something different about us. I couldn't just go on ignoring this secret forever. "What's wrong?" he asked, brushing his nose against mine. My voice drifted off and I bit my lip. If I told him the truth, there would be no hiding the fact that I deceived him and that my interest in him had come as part of a scheme to keep my family's business. But if I was losing that business anyway, maybe confessing would be the right thing to do? Maybe there was nothing else to lose? Maybe, with everything I'd lost, I could open myself up to something new. Someone like Peter. He deserved my full honesty. "There's something I have to tell you," I said, biting my bottom lip. "And it's not exactly a pleasant subject." "I think I know what you're going to say," he said, his voice low and his eyes fixed on the sand beneath our feet. He shook his head. "I hate the secret between us." My eyebrows drew together. "How did you know what I was going to say?" "You have to understand that when you asked if I'd done a background check on you when we were on the cruise, I told you the truth." A cold chill ran through me. "The truth? What are you talking about?" "After that night, my assistant looked into your background," he said, shocking me to my very core. "I didn't ask him to, you have to believe me. He's my cousin and said he was worried about me. I told him that's no excuse for invading your privacy. But he said after what happened with my dad, he didn't want anything else to catch me off guard right now. He didn't want there to be anything that could unsettle me like that again so soon." I stepped back from him. "How could I unsettle you?" He reached for my hand, but when I frowned he pulled back. "He said I've been different since I met you. He says I've fallen for you too hard, too fast. That I might not be thinking clearly." I told him he's acting crazy. "So, you know about?" I asked, my voice tiny against the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. "I know your family owns the Main Street mini-mart," he said, slowly, as though he was testing the waters. "The one where I submitted a purchase offer. He texted me earlier and let me know the offer was accepted, so I know the sale is going to go through soon, too." I clasped a hand to my forehead. "I can't believe this is happening." "I'm sorry," he said, looking me directly in the eyes. He reached for my hand again and this time I didn't pull away. "I should have told you as soon as I found out. I wanted to." "Why didn't you?" I asked, my throat tightening. He paused a moment. "I was scared to lose you. I care about you, Anna." "I care about you, too," I blurted, surprised at the words that came out of my mouth, even though they were completely true and 100% sincere. "But what good does that do us in this situation?" I took his other hand in mine and squeezed them both. "I've lost so much in the last few weeks. My entire family has." He furrowed his brow at me. "You don't think I understand that? My dad. It's different for me, Peter. I know you lost your dad. I'm so sorry you have to go through that loss, too. But at least you have the chance to build something new." His eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "The mini-mart is all my family has left of my dad," I said, as if pleading with him. "I know that's hard for you to wrap your head around, but if we lose this place then we lose our last connection to him along with it." "And you don't think I sympathize with your loss?" he asked, his voice tightening. "You think I'm heartless because I'm purchasing a business that's in trouble?" I didn't want to answer that question, so his sentence hung between us. The only sound was the ocean waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. "What about you, Anna?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the rushing of the waves. "Why didn't you tell me you owned the mini-mart?" Guilt washed through me, leaking into every pore like cold mud. "When you invited me to join you at the Christmas tree ceremony, I thought that might be my chance to convince you not to make any changes to the mini-mart." A flicker of pain crossed his face. "You were using me? Spending time with me with an agenda? Well, it didn't work, did it?" I said, scuffing my foot in the sand and feeling horrible about what I'd done. You're getting the mini-mart and you'll inject new life into it until everything my dad worked for is unrecognizable. Is that what all of this was about? He demanded, looking at me like I'd broken his heart. You were just spending time with me on behalf of your business? Yes, but I thought we understood each other. He tilted his head and looked at me sideways, as if he could hardly stand to look at me at all. You were the only person in this town who seemed to like me for who I was and not for what I could do for you. I stared at him for a long moment, guilt rising up in my chest. Okay, so maybe I didn't come into this with the purest intentions. I'm sorry for that. But I just wanted things to stay the same. What do you mean? He asked. I folded my hands in prayer position. I know we can't avoid selling you the store, but you don't have to change things, do you? Anna, he raked a hand through his hair. I felt awful that I was putting him in this position, but desperation coursed through me. If I had just been honest from the start and told him the truth about what I wanted from him, then maybe we could have had a chance at a real relationship. But I'd gone down a dishonest route, and I had to pay for that big time. Everything I wanted was teetering on the edge of a cliff, threatening to plunge off into disaster below, and I didn't know if I could handle losing the mini-mart and losing Peter. Just leave the store the way it is, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even as my throat tightened. You can't ask that of me, he said, stepping back. The store is part of a development plan. Several teams have worked hard to put this in place. Hot tears pricked the backs of my eyes. I swallowed heavily and tried to stop them coming. I hadn't cried last night, and I wasn't going to cry now. I just wanted all of this to be over. No. I wanted none of this to have happened in the first place. My chest went hollow, all of a sudden. I had tried everything I could think of to save the mini-mart, and yet I could feel my dad sliding away from me. I had thrown myself at Peter's feet and begged Peter to hand me a lifesaver, but he had declined. You're telling me that you have to destroy my dad's dream? I asked, my entire body going numb. He grimaced, as though this wasn't the conversation he wanted to be having with me. We wouldn't have put the offer in if we didn't have plans for the space. I knew the business wasn't doing well, but if I'd known what your family was going through, then I wouldn't have included the location in the plans. But now. His voice had trailed off, but he didn't need to say anything more. Things were changing. There was nothing I could do to stop it. I had tried my best, and I had failed. The mini-mart was going to him, and he would do whatever was in his development plans. The thought of the mini-mart gutted out and made into a tourist spot made nausea rise up in my throat. But there was nothing I could do to change that. I had to find some way to come to terms with it. Fine, you win, I said, unable to believe the two of us had been kissing not long ago. I couldn't believe that I'd thought I might have a future with this man. Maybe I was angry with myself and directing it outward toward him, but the pain was too much to bear. I have to go, I said, my voice taut and firm. Part of me wanted him to come up with something, a reason to stay here longer. I didn't know what he could say or do that would help undo the damage that had been done by both of us, but I didn't care. I just needed him to say something. Anything. But he stayed silent, and I shook my head. Goodbye, Peter, I said, and then turned to head back up the path to the inn at Blue Moon Bay. I hugged my body as I hurried up the steps, tears sliding down my cheeks, and a horrible aching sound coming from my mouth. I'd lost the last link I had to my dad. It was over. I needed to put Peter behind me, too. But as I walked away, I knew it wasn't going to be as easy as that. Maybe the Kissed by the Bay legend was right after all, that we had sealed our love with a kiss down there. Because I could feel a draw, pulling me back to him, like an elemental force of nature tugging at my every step. I ignored the pull and kept walking. It was over. Whatever we'd had was done. And now, I had to figure out where I would go from here. Chapter 10. A week and a half later, I followed Carrie and Michelle into an independent bookstore in downtown Blue Moon Bay with my head hung low, and my feet dragging as though I were lugging a 100-pound weight behind me. We were getting some last-minute Christmas shopping done, but my heart wasn't in it. The Holly Jolly Christmas lyrics came out from the sound system, and I wished the joy of the song could be infused into me somehow. No such luck. Michelle suggested coming into the bookstore because she had to pick up a copy of some new celebrity cookbook that her sister wanted for Christmas. Carrie had talked me into venturing out of my house, something I hadn't done since the mini-mart had gone under contract with Peter. The 10-day escrow period had just ended, though, and the mini-mart belonged to him now. I glanced around the bookstore, which was old and charming, the epitome of tradition. But for some reason I found myself looking at it in a new light, wondering if injecting the store with new life might give the shelves of books an extra something. A blow-up Santa hung outside the front door, and seeing it had felt like a kick to the gut. I hadn't talked to or seen Peter since that awful afternoon by the Kissed by the Bay plaque, and I missed him like crazy. I stared at a hardback cover of a moon, thinking so much for the local legend coming true. Although, I supposed Peter and I hadn't kissed under a blue moon. But, still. I shook my head to clear my mind. What happened to the practical part of me that knew true love wasn't about a legend coming true, but, oh, what did I know about love? All I'd learned in the few past months was how it felt to have my heart ripped in two. Not fun. Not fun at all. Are you all right? Carrie turned to me, touching my arm lightly, furrowing her brow as she took in my had-to-be maudlin expression. I tried to smile, but the effort felt forced. Yeah, I'm fine, I said, but she raised her eyebrows at me. Is your mood due to Peter? She asked gently. I sighed, my shoulders slumping down as his name danced around my head. Peter. There it was again, that collection of letters that seemed to have a specific alchemy in my head, lighting up the synapses of my brain like Christmas tree decorations. Yeah, it's about Peter, I admitted. I had told Carrie and Michelle about what had happened between us when the girls and I met for margaritas last week at Frankie's Fiesta. I'd unloaded about the confrontation that had ended with me storming off and leaving him at that spot on the beach all alone. I could still see his face in my mind, visibly upset. But I'd been dealt a hard blow that had taken away the last connection I had to my dad. The grieving was hard to bear. Still, I felt terrible. Michelle came up beside me with no book in her hand. She seemed to immediately sense that Carrie and I were talking about something serious. Everything okay? She's missing Peter, Carrie said, eyeing me sadly. Hey, stop worrying about me, I said, gesturing at the books around us so I wouldn't bring my friends down to my sad state. This was meant to be a fun shopping trip. Don't you have a celebrity book to buy or something? The gal behind the counter said it doesn't release until after the new year, Michelle said, slipping an arm around me. What can we do to cheer you up? I let out a long sigh. I don't want to be a downer. You don't have to pretend around us, Carrie said, giving me a meaningful look. We're your friends. We just want what's best for you. I felt as though I might start crying right there in the astronomy aisle. They were being really sweet to me. I'd been so hard on myself with how I'd treated Peter that any display of kindness was enough to set me off. I'd felt like Peter had been the one keeping me from a full-blown breakdown, and now he was gone. My throat tightened. I had to find some way to move on without him. Without my dad. And without the mini-mart, too. Thanks for looking out for me, you guys, I said, biting my bottom lip. I hadn't been sleeping well and I must look a mess, but it was hard to care about my looks in my current state of mind. Have you heard from Peter at all? Michelle asked, and Carrie widened her eyes at her, clearly telling her to drop the subject. No, I shook my head, a tiny hole growing in my chest. He bought the store and now he's changing it so. I don't know. I'm too afraid to go anywhere near it. He believes in injecting new life into failing businesses. The mini-mart probably won't be recognizable once his team is through with it. Surely there's an upside, though. Michelle pointed out, grasping at straws if you asked me. I mean, you don't have to worry about the business anymore. That had to be a huge stress for all three of you. Chuck had these dark circles under his eyes when I'd gone in for a bag of chips a few weeks ago. You must have some relief from that worry being gone. And your mom will live comfortably with the money from the sale. Yes, that's all true, I said, feeling that rush of irritation, not at Michelle, but at myself for not being able to save the store from changing. Well, then? Michelle furrowed her brow. It could be worse. Someone could have come in to tear the whole place down. At least Peter Locke is only making changes. My parents have always believed in tradition. I waved my hand around the aisle. Like this bookstore, for example. Places like this, you know, real places. Places that have been here for as long as we can remember. Peter doesn't understand why that's so important. But Peter owns the mini-mart now, Carrie reminded me, her tone quiet. It's his right to do what he wants with it. Oh, trust me, I'm well aware of that, I said, rolling my eyes, which were dry from lack of sleep. Then a dull pain throbbed in my chest. It hurts that he didn't listen to anything I had to say. I know it's his business, but at the same time it's my dad. I don't know why I'm so upset. We were doomed from the start. Carrie and Michelle exchanged looks, and then Carrie took my arm. Let's take you back home, Carrie said, leading me down the aisle. Spending some time with your mom and your brother will do you good. No, I'm fine. I shook my head, wishing the Christmas music coming through the store speakers would lift my spirits like it had every other year. You have shopping to do. I don't want to get in the way of that. Don't be silly, Michelle replied firmly. You should get some rest. Do I seem like I need it? I smiled at her ruefully, and she grinned back. Get some sleep and come around to my store tomorrow. We can drink some hot apple cider and talk about all things happy, Carrie promised. I'm in, I said, closing my eyes for a moment. Things were changing against my will, but at least I had my dear friends to guide me through the worst of it. We headed out of the store and back to my place. I tried my best not to focus on the wobbly feeling in my gut, the uncertainty about where my life was going. Michelle was right that I needed some rest. After some sleep, I could start seeing everything through fresh eyes and start putting this all behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks as we turned the corner around the block. Horror rushed through my system. No. Not yet. No. A line of construction vehicles were parked outside the mini-mart. The drivers and workers were hanging around and chatting with each other as they waited for instructions. In the middle of the crowd stood Peter. My stomach nodded. Anna, what are you? Carrie took a moment to realize what was happening, but as soon as she did, she grabbed my arm. Peter seemed to have heard her voice, because he glanced up and we locked eyes. I couldn't read the expression on his face from this far away, though. Was he happy to see me? Angry? Feeling guilty? I wanted to tear my gaze from his but couldn't. I needed him to know I missed him even after everything that had happened. But the sight of the workers around my store had nausea rising up my throat. Come on, Anna. You don't need to see this, Carrie said, tugging on my arm. She glanced over at Michelle. Let's get her out of here. With one last lingering look at Peter, I tore my gaze away and turned my back on the nightmare around my family's store. Correction, my family's former store. Carrie was right. I didn't need to see this. I couldn't watch my dad's dream being ripped to shreds by the man I loved. Chapter 11. I drummed my fingers on the kitchen table at home and reached over to turn up the radio sitting on the shelf next to us. Mom busied herself with the cooking, humming along to Jingle Bells absent-mindedly. I couldn't figure out how she could feel so chipper given the tragedies of our life, but I wished I could grab hold of the joy she felt. "You all right, Anna?" Chuck asked as he wandered into the kitchen, carrying a bag of groceries under his arm. "Not really," I replied. I knew I was acting prickly and that I wasn't going to achieve anything by being cranky, but there was an empty spot inside my soul. And these guys were just fine, going on like everything was hunky-dory. How could that be? How could they just go about their days when everything that we had worked for was gone? "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Mom turned to me with raised eyebrows. Her eyes were brighter than they had been in a long time and her stance was straighter, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "The mini-mart is gone," I said, pointing out the obvious. By now, the whole place had probably been gutted, and construction workers had likely destroyed the entire place. I hadn't been able to watch, avoiding downtown while the worst went down. "Yeah, but if you'd looked at the books you'd know that was inevitable," Chuck said, shrugging. "It was good while it lasted, but you can't keep losing money and expect to stay in business. Now? No more money trouble. That's a good thing." "Yes, exactly." Mom gave a firm nod. "You have no idea how much better I feel now that I don't have to worry about creditors anymore." "What about Dad?" I asked, and the shock that ran over her face made me feel bad for mentioning it. "But, hello?" She was acting like a Stepford mom. I didn't get it. "What about the store he spent his entire life working to build up? You don't care about that?" "Of course I care, sweetheart," Mom replied, gently. "But your dad wouldn't want us worrying about the mini-mart for the rest of our lives. He would have wanted us to be happy. So, we're supposed to just move on like everything is dandy?" I shot back, wondering why I seemed to be the only one hurting. I watched my mom wipe her hands off on a dish towel and then give me a look like she didn't know what to do with me. I turned to Chuck, hoping that my brother would understand. "What about you?" I asked. "Huh?" He pulled a loaf of bread from the grocery bag and gave me a wide-eyed look like he knew he was in trouble and didn't get why. "Are you really fine with all of this?" I asked. "Look, I think change can be a good thing," he said, already sounding exhausted by the turn this conversation had taken. "Maybe this is what we need to, let go." "Just let go?" I asked, wondering how those 3 words could make it sound simple when my emotions were in turmoil. "You worked at the mini-mart. Don't you care what you're going to do for employment?" "Yeah, but his voice trailed off and he glanced at Mom, who gave a finger swipe across her neck as if she were giving him a shut-up signal. "You actually what?" I narrowed my eyes at him and got to my feet. Chuck had always been terrible at keeping secrets, so I would get the truth out of him one way or another. He glanced at Mom, then back to me, and carried on with unpacking the bag. "Chuck?" I repeated. "I spoke with Peter Locke yesterday," he said, and my heart dropped. Okay, I hadn't expected him to say that. I was dying to ask him 100 questions. Like, how did Peter look? Did he seem okay? Did he mention me? Instead, I crossed my arms over my chest. "You talked to Peter about what?" "I was just chatting with him about what he plans to do with the mini-mart now," he said, shrugging. And, well, he offered me a job. You're going to work for Peter? I stared at him, dumbfounded. Why not? He's a nice guy, Anna. You should give him a chance. I wanted to tell him I had given Peter far more of a chance than either of them knew about, but that wasn't the point. And I was hardly going to let them know the truth about what had happened between us. What good would that do? We'd had a short-lived, doomed romance. Just like the couple in the legend, ironically. So you're going to be working for him? Just like that? I asked. I don't know yet, he said, folding up the paper bag he'd unpacked. But I like the idea of staying on at the mini-mart, you know? Suddenly, this was all too much for me, and I headed for the front door. Well, good luck with that, Chuck. Where are you going? Mom asked. Dinner's almost ready. And that's when it hit me, there was nowhere for me to go. Carrie was working at her store. Michelle was writing her novel and with her family, getting ready for Christmas. Peter probably had no interest in seeing me. I didn't have a job anymore, or anything beyond the walls of this house. Nowhere. I'm going absolutely nowhere. I sank back down into the chair as the music continued to play through the radio, chirping out "Here Comes Santa Claus" and reminding me of Peter. I missed his smile, his warmth, and his humor. Peter was gone, the shop was gone, and my dad was gone. I was glad to be home in Blue Moon Bay, but I realized part of my anxiety might be coming from having no permanent place to live and no job. Nothing had worked out the way I'd hoped. I had to come to terms with that like my mom and brother obviously had. I'd read that the hardest things in life were moving, a career change, and death. I just realized I was dealing with all three. Peter had taught me that I needed to view change in a more friendly manner. Like it or not, my life had changed completely. I had to face up to what my life was now. But, how? Chapter 12. After the first good night's sleep I'd had in months, I knew what I had to do this morning. I strode along the sidewalk downtown beside the cobblestone street, closing my eyes for a bit of strength before turning the familiar corner. This was going to be hard, but I may as well face this sooner rather than later. I wasn't going to be stuck in the past any longer. Time to move forward with my life. Today was the day that the new mini-mart would open, and I couldn't have been more nervous. It had been almost 2 weeks since I'd seen Peter and his construction crew. I had avoided both him and the construction, which wasn't easy in a small town. He had made no effort to reach out to me either, which was fair enough, since I had shot him down when we last saw each other. I had been the one to walk away, and I had to live with that. I'd been miserable since breaking things off with him. He was a kindred spirit and we'd clicked in a way that had never happened before with anyone I'd dated. That plaque really was nonsense. We had kissed at that spot by the bay and nothing had happened. Or at least, it hadn't happened yet. I had to make it happen by laying my feelings on the table. And that meant I had to see Peter again. If only to apologize for the way I'd acted before. I owed him that much. Now that I knew he was giving Chuck a position, I had to show him my gratitude that my brother could still be part of the mini-mart. At the end of the day, too, he had rescued my family from financial ruin. There wasn't anyone else in this town who would have taken the store off our hands, especially at that price, and now my mom had enough money to live on comfortably for a long time. I had to be an adult about this, even if I'd been acting like a dramatic teenager the last few weeks. Resisting change? Me? Maybe a little. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel walking in there and seeing everything changed, but I was as ready as I was ever going to be. So I turned that corner and stopped dead in my tracks outside the mini-mart. A cluster of people were hanging out, not workers either, people I knew. I spotted Carrie and Michelle immediately. And there stood my mom and Chuck, too. I stood there for a moment, not sure what to make of it, before Carrie turned and saw me and waved me down to join them. I knew the opening was today, but surely it couldn't be that big a deal to this many people. I had ducked out early for a large latte at Bayside Coffee this morning, determined to browse the employment opportunities in the newspaper, so when I left, Chuck and Mom weren't out of bed yet. "Anna, you've got to see this." Carrie called to me as I made my way down to join them on legs that felt like spaghetti. What did I have to see? Were they angry? Shocked? I couldn't tell. As I got closer, I could see tears glistening in my mom's eyes, and my heart ached for her. Seeing all this change had to be so difficult. I turned and looked at the new Main Street mini-mart and my mouth dropped open. Mostly because everything looked the same. The same sign, the same frosted windows, the same candy canes displayed in the windows. No, not the same, better. The place looked incredible, like someone had taken the store and scrubbed it up so it looked shiny and new. When I looked up at the mini-mart's awning, I gasped. Gold bells hung on either side of the awning, and my throat tightened. I could almost hear my dad saying bells for the Bell family, kids, as he took Chuck and me for our cups of hot chocolate. The gold bells were the same old, dilapidated wooden bells we'd hung year after year. They were a beautiful sight, bringing tears to my eyes. Then I chuckled, realizing that they kind of did look like a fire hazard. Hopefully Peter had thought to spray them with some kind of protectant. "Can you believe it?" Mom asked, grabbing my hand and squeezing it hard. I turned to her, my eyes wide. "Is Peter here?" I asked. "Yes, I am," a familiar male voice came from behind me. My belly did a flip and I turned to find myself looking into the eyes of the man I hadn't been able to get out of my head these past few weeks. "Peter," I said, trying to catch my breath. The corner of his mouth curved upward. "Do you like it?" I nodded, feeling shy and eager at the same time. "Can we go inside?" I asked. Everyone was crowded outside the door, as though waiting for something, but Peter gestured for me to go in. "Be my first guest," he said. I bit my lip and pushed the door open. Sure, it all looked the same from the outside, but when I got in, wow. Just wow. As I stood there feeling stunned, everyone came tumbling in around me. Soon, the place was filled with life once more, overflowing with people. Peter came up beside me, and gave me a side glance. "How about the inside?" he asked, his arm brushing mine. "You like it?" "Peter, this is incredible," my voice trailed off as I looked all around me. The entire store had been remodeled, but in the same style. The layout of the aisles was the same, the register was in the same place, the light still streamed in through the frosted windows. But the interior had been freshened up with upgraded countertops, paint, and shelving. It looked better than anything we could ever have afforded. "I can't believe you did all of this." On the wall behind the counter, there was a framed photo of my family, including my dad. Tears filled my eyes. That photo hadn't been there before Peter had bought the mini-mart. Where had he gotten that? I blinked back my tears and swallowed down my emotions before I made a blubbering fool of myself. "Wait until I show you the best part," he said, taking my hand. "Here." My hand tingled from his touch as he led me to a curve in the back of the store, which was a small area that used to be where we kept stock and other paraphernalia. But the wall had been knocked through, and now, in its place, stood a glass case I recognized at once. "You got this from Giovanni's Gelato," he said, finishing my sentence with a big grin on his face. "I purchased everything in their closeout sale. All the flavors they had left, and Rosa will be making more, as well. It won't be open for another couple of days since Rosa's in Italy, taking a much-needed vacation, she said. She'll be working here? You brought Giovanni's gelato to the mini-mart? Yep, he said, nodding proudly. You can come and get your favorite gelato here whenever you want now. Rosa is thrilled to be managing this part of the store. This is amazing, Peter, I said, shaking my head. I can't believe how you've pulled everything together. Just injecting some new life into an established business while also keeping tradition alive. Someone special taught me that the combination of the two ideas would be better than the one alone, he said, winking at me. He took my hand again, and suddenly the hustle and bustle of the people around us seemed to drop away. I stared into his beautiful eyes, unable to believe he'd combined both of our ideas with amazing results. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer drifted through the speakers, providing an upbeat backdrop that lifted my heart. Or maybe it was Peter who had made the difference. Yes, definitely Peter. I'm impressed at your business sense, I said, meaning every word. Combining tradition and new ideas is the ideal combination. Just like us, he said, his eyes filled with emotion. He glanced down at our entwined fingers and then lifted his head to meet my gaze again. Anna, when you were talking to me down at the beach, I wasn't listening to you the way I should have been. Being open to new ideas and change is something I pride myself on, but I was resistant to your preference for tradition. I'm sorry I let you down. What do you mean? How did you let me down? You just wanted to keep the memory of your dad alive. I know how it feels to lose someone you love. I should have understood better than anyone how important it is to honor them any way that you can. Peter, my voice trailed off as emotion filled my chest and I stared deep into his eyes. I love what you've done with the mini-mart. I really, truly love it, but I did it for you, Anna. I know you did, I said, as he looked at me with such love in his eyes that I knew I had to be the luckiest person in the world. Thank you so much. But I realized something this morning, which is why I came here to talk to you. What is it? Since we first met, I've worried that losing the mini-mart and changes to the mini-mart meant losing the last of my dad. But this morning, I woke up and realized that he'd lived his dream while he was alive, which is what we all should do. Live our own dreams. No matter what happens to the mini-mart now, I'll never lose the best gift my dad gave me his whole life, his love. I know that he'll be in my heart every day and in everything I do, because part of who I am is from the love he gave me. Nobody can take that away from me. You're right. They will always be with us. I know that now. I nodded, and then took in a deep breath. But I also learned. Excuse me, Mom said, breaking the moment by bustling over to us. Then she stopped suddenly. Am I interrupting something? I'm sorry. I just wanted to extend my appreciation for how you've rejuvenated the mini-mart. Peter turned to her with a wide smile. You're most welcome. When Chuck asked me for that family photo, I wondered what he was up to. You know, it was taken 5 years ago this Christmas, which seems fitting. It does indeed, Peter said. I felt a swell of adoration for him, for making my mom smile again, for giving Chuck a job running the mini-mart, and for giving me another chance. Well, if his amazing gesture meant he still wanted to be with me, anyway. Mom, this is Peter Locke, I said, officially introducing them. Yes, I know who he is, she replied, glancing between us as though she were missing something. He's the reason I've been able to get through the last month without completely falling apart, I said, taking his hand. For a second, I wondered if I was being too bold. After everything that had happened, maybe I needed to hold back a little and let him catch up with me. But he squeezed my hand tight, giving me the strength to continue. He's the one who put up all the inflatable Santas downtown for Christmas. She raised an eyebrow. The ones you complained about? Yes. I nodded, feeling sheepish. Pretty ironic considering he seems to be Santa himself, giving us the best gift we ever could have received. He has the spirit of Santa, no doubt, she said, giving a secretive smile. I took a deep breath, then lifted my lashes to him. He's also the man I've fallen for. Peter's green eyes danced and the corners of his mouth twitched. Is that so? You think I didn't guess? Mom said, shaking her head. Mothers know everything, you should both understand that by now. Peter and I both laughed, the sound intermixed with the joyous conversations of the people around us who were either shopping or just checking out the all-new Main Street mini-mart. Thank you, Peter, she said, her tone sincere. For what you've done for our family. We won't soon forget it. Not at all, Mrs. Bell, he said. Please, call me Cindy, she said, patting his arm and then glancing over at me. I should probably help your brother. What does Chuck need help with? I asked, following her around the corner to see what was happening. I smiled to see my brother behind the register, checking out customers while more streamed into the store. There must have been dozens of people inside, all turning up to support the opening of the new store. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen it this busy, if ever. Thank you, Peter, I said, turning to him. For doing all of this for us. For you, he corrected me. I did it for you. I wanted you to have a place to come to remember your dad and all of the good times you had with him. You've given a little part of my dad back to me. You have no idea how much that means. You truly are Santa, I said, caressing his cheek as he smiled at me. Well, thank you for saving me from getting crushed under that parade, he said, moving aside as a customer reached behind him for a can from the shelf. Being stomped on by a clarinet player is no laughing matter. I chuckled at his joke, and then sobered up. You saved me, too, Peter. Anytime, he stroked my hair back from my face. I missed you, sweet, practical Annabelle. I missed you, too, I said, squeezing his hand. Hey, there's something else I want to show you, he said. Something really important. What is it? I asked. He pointed to the ceiling above us. Look. I glanced up and saw a small cluster of mistletoe hanging above us. Did you put that there especially for me? I asked, raising my eyebrows. The corner of his mouth lifted. I was hoping you'd be amenable to it. Oh, I'm so amenable. I glanced around, making sure we weren't in anyone's way, because, you know, there's nothing wrong with being practical and romantic. Once I confirmed the coast was clear, I leaned toward him and smiled up at this man who had turned this Christmas season around for me. With joy in my heart, I planted a gentle kiss against his lips and then everything around me dropped away. My belly did a flip, making me feel like I was kissing him for the very first time. I wound my arms tightly around his neck, holding him close, never wanting to let him go. Peter had taken my pain and turned it around. I knew the grief of losing my dad would not retreat easily, but for the first time I could think of my dad and smile. When I pulled back from our kiss, Peter brushed his nose against mine. You make me happy. I know the feeling, I said, closing my eyes and resting my forehead against his. It had been a long time since I had felt this safe, this grounded. Anna! Mom's voice heightened with urgency, cracking through our tender moment. I turned toward the register and went up on my tippy toes to see her over the shelves. Yeah? Could you look in the back and see if we have any more eggnog? She asked, sounding just like old times. I grinned at Peter. Care to show me the new stockrooms? Wouldn't mind one little bit, he said. As Peter led me to the back of the store, I realized the thought of staying in Blue Moon Bay no longer felt like a painful ending, but a hopeful beginning. Something told me that my dad would have loved Peter. I could almost feel him smiling down at me. Chapter 13. On Christmas Day, Carrie and I picked up lattes from Bayside Coffee and then walked to the town square where I gazed at all of the festive Christmas decorations with delight. The area was crowded with families, all excited for the arrival of Santa. Carrie glanced at me. "When is Santa going to get here?" I lifted a shoulder. "How should I know? I don't keep tabs on him." "You don't keep tabs on your boyfriend? Trust is good." She laughed and rubbed her hands together to keep them warm. "It's 10 o'clock. He should be here by now." I bought him a framed saying that reads "always late, but worth the wait for Christmas." I grinned, knowing that was just Peter's MO. He was on his way, I knew that much, because he'd texted me when he'd left his office. Let's just hope he doesn't dart in front of any carolers or get himself run over before he arrives. "That would not be good," Carrie said, shaking her head. "You guys here for Santa, as well?" came a man's voice, with a slight Texas twang. I turned to find Janine Davis, who was the general manager of the inn at Blue Moon Bay, and her husband Jackson, who had remodeled a beautiful Victorian house in town, approaching us. "We've been waiting for Santa, but he must be running late," Carrie said, checking the time on her phone for the third time. "Probably forgot to set the timer on his sleigh." I laughed. "He'll be here soon." "Hot drinks sound divine," Janine said, her gaze latching onto my white to-go cup with its blue writing. She nudged her husband with her hip, and glanced up at him. "Can we run over and grab a white chocolate mocha from Bayside Coffee?" "Sure thing," he said, nodding to Carrie and me before he ducked his head in farewell. I turned to Carrie, with my eyebrow lifted. "They're so cute together," I said, sipping my latte. "I heard they eloped because they couldn't wait to get married." "So sweet." "You think that's sweet?" What happened to my friend who lacked spontaneity and thought everything had to be planned down to every last detail? "I was never that bad," I said, rolling my eyes as Carrie gave me a long stare. "Okay, maybe I've changed a little." She chuckled, waving to a woman who walked by with a man who was very handsome. "Who are they?" I asked. "Harper and Gabriel," she said, smiling as they waved, returning her greeting. "They just got engaged and they're divorce lawyers." "You serious?" I chuckled. "That's a new one for me." "Yeah, well, they seem like they're doing pretty well." She shrugged. "And you're hardly one to talk about ending up with someone you shouldn't, right?" "I guess so." I grinned at her, and suddenly the crowd around us began to buzz with excitement. I looked around, and burst out laughing when I saw Santa on his way. Peter was approaching in a ridiculous sleigh, dragged along by a couple of reindeer, although I could hear some kind of quiet motor on the sleigh, too. Peter wore a classic Santa outfit right down to the long, white beard, and he had a big grin on his face as he waved at everyone he passed by. There was a burst of applause as he came by, and then the band, who had almost mowed Peter down the first time we met, sprang into a cheery rendition of "Deck the Halls." The sleigh came to a halt next to the enormous chair that had been set inside the gazebo for his arrival. He climbed out of the sleigh and slipped into his seat, shouting, "Ho ho ho! Merry Christmas!" A line formed in front of him, but I noticed that his eyes were locked on me. Even through the fuzz of that big, white wig and the beard, I could see his green eyes pinned to mine, which made my belly do a little dance. "You want to get in line?" Carrie asked. I shrugged. "I'll let everyone else go first." "Fair enough." She rubbed her hands together briskly. "Do you mind if I run back to my store? I forgot a gift I wanted to give Michelle when she finally arrives." Running late as usual. Be my guest, I said, lifting my cup in a cheers gesture. She grinned at me. Merry Christmas, Anna. I leaned over to give her a quick hug. Right back at ya, Carrie. A few minutes later, I joined the line and waited for the kids to have their time with Santa. It seemed as though the town had really come around to Peter. Maybe not as much as I had, of course, but they were starting to see his sweetness, his kindness, the generosity of spirit that he had, and everything he could bring to this wonderful town. This first Christmas without Dad has been hard, and this coming year wasn't going to be easy without him, but I could talk about him and smile with my mom and brother now. And that was a Christmas gift all in itself. Finally, the line began to dwindle, and soon it was just me at the end of the line. Peter grinned as I approached the chair, a reindeer snorting softly next to the gazebo. Merry Christmas, Santa, I greeted him, and he held his hand out to me. I took it, and he pulled me onto his lap, drawing a squeal from between my lips. Have you been a good girl? He asked, and I bit my lip. I guess you'll have to find out, I said, leaning forward and pressing my mouth to his. My toes curled in my thick winter boots and I snuggled against him, running my hand over his rough jacket and the soft fur trim. Here he was, the man I loved, the person who had saved Christmas for my family and me. I pulled back, and he brushed his nose against mine. We still going to your mom's place for Christmas dinner tonight? He asked. She's been looking forward to seeing you all day, I said, not mentioning she'd also been cooking since 6 o'clock in the morning. Maybe cooking was a distraction for her this year, but I think she was also happy that I'd finally brought a guy home. Fair warning, she's going to want you to turn up in that outfit. Why don't we take the sleigh up there? He suggested, gesturing to the magical sleigh. I think I have a decent grasp on how to actually control it now. I laughed. Well, that makes me feel safe. I aim to please, he said, slipping his arm around me. Anything you still want for Christmas, Anna? Nope. I shook my head. A cool breeze blew by, but a warm feeling enveloped me. I have everything I need, and then some. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Maybe one more kiss for Santa? With a smile on my face, I leaned forward and kissed him with all of the love in my heart. Epilogue. 1 year later. The ocean waves lapped against the shore in soothing rhythmic tones as I leaned back in the Adirondack chair on the beach behind the inn at Blue Moon Bay. Under the light of the full moon, my diamond engagement ring sparkled on the ring finger of my left hand, and I glanced over at the weathered pillars holding the plaque with the Kissed by the Bay legend. White and red twinkling Christmas lights decorated the pillars, making me wonder if the inn owners Wendy and Brian had put them there for the holidays, or if Peter was just spreading some more of his Christmas cheer, which would be so like him. Peter and I had seen each other every day since I took the job at his office as the communications director. I loved making sure each project was moving along as it should be, coordinating with the different parties, and Peter always valued my feedback on each project. I knew some of my friends might be driven crazy working with their significant other day after day, but it worked for Peter and me. In fact, I loved it. It's sweet of you to bring me here tonight, I said, glancing at the cheese, salmon and olive plate on the side table before I reached over and ran my fingers along Peter's forearm. And you packed a yummy dinner for us. You really are the best. No need to thank me, honey. Peter tapped me on the nose gently and gave me a warm smile. I know this is your favorite place and thought it might be a comfort to you after the news you received today. Sigh. He knew me so well. Thank you. I smiled back at him, pushing the news out of my mind for the moment. I do love it here, and not just because we kissed here at the beginning of our relationship, or because you proposed here, which was so incredibly romantic. Why then? He asked. Because, I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his. This is where you inspired me to believe in more than what was practical. You believed in the legend, which made part of me believe in it, too. You opened my eyes to the potential in change instead of just clinging to tradition, and my new perspective started right here. Well, right over there by the pillars. I gestured toward the weathered pillars just as misty fingers of cold air passed by the plaque. Tiny sparkles of silver glitter outlined the mist, and I had to blink several times to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Then the silver glitter faded until the entire mist was gone. What the? Huh. Must have imagined it. I glanced upward at the white globe hanging high above the ocean and gasped. Look, Peter. There's a blue moon tonight. Really? He looked upward and the corner of his mouth lifted. There wasn't a blue moon when we first kissed here, but I like to think because we kissed in that exact spot by the bay, that means the couple in the legend had a hand in our falling in love. I fall more in love with you every day, I said, squeezing his hand. Then I remembered something I'd learned about the couple in the legend. A few weeks ago, I went out for margaritas with Carrie, Claire, and Michelle at Frankie's Fiesta. The owner of the inn, Wendy, was sitting behind us having a girls' night with her friends Olivia, Megan, and that movie star Charlie Rockwell Montgomery. I remember you doing that, he said, refilling our wine glasses with a lovely Chardonnay from the Napa Valley. Same night Chuck and I went to Scotty's seafood restaurant. Scotty had brought in the band Street Nights to perform all weekend in celebration of his marriage to Greta Von Strand. I read she has a new book on the New York Times bestseller list. Really? Good for her. We have a lot of talent here in Blue Moon Bay. We certainly do. Anyway, I overheard Wendy telling her friends that her grandmother, the one who passed away and left Wendy and Brian the inn in her will, was the girl in the legend. No kidding. Peter laughed, setting his wine glass back down. That would make sense since the legend is held here at the inn. Wow. So, the legend is true after all. I nodded. My practical side always wished the young lady would have written to her love in secret and met up with him after they turned 18. I overheard Wendy saying that her grandmother had regretted letting go of her love. It's so tragic. He tilted his head to the side. You can look at it as tragic, or you can look at it as a gift. A gift? I guffawed. How? We never know the bigger plan in life, but, for instance, think of all of the magic the legend has given couples, the gift of forever love. If that couple in the legend had gotten things right, then maybe others would have lost their loves. Oh, Peter. You're a hopeless romantic, I said, and then leaned over to kiss my fiancé. He greeted my kiss happily, his lips warm against mine. Then he opened his mouth and his tongue caressed mine, making me feel treasured and safe. The kiss was long and sweet, and my belly did a somersault. I couldn't wait to marry this man. We had planned a small ceremony in front of the Christmas tree in the town square on Christmas Day, with close friends and family. My mom would walk me down the aisle and I knew my dad would be smiling down at us. I knew I was truly lucky, even after the news I'd received today. When Peter pulled away, he brushed his knuckles along my jawline. You doing okay? Just thinking of my grandpa. I sighed, breathing in the familiar scent of seawater, which did soothe and comfort me some. You know, he and I looked a lot alike. Yes, he was as handsome as you are beautiful. Thanks, honey, I said, thinking my sweet fiancé always knew how to give a compliment, and he gave them genuinely from his heart. I knew Grandpa was sick and that the end was near for him, but it's still hard. I know, honey. I know. My heart warmed from the strength he gave me in those words of understanding. I'm glad you got to meet him at Thanksgiving when we flew to New York. His spirits lifted when he talked to you, as if he'd known you for years. He was a really nice man. I'm glad I got to meet him, too. Loss is hard and I know grieving is normal. But there's one thing that still bothers me. I took a sip of my wine and then fingered the stem of the glass. My mom talked to Grandpa's sister, my great-aunt, who was with him when he died. She said he kept repeating, "I finally get to see her again. I finally get to see her again." What do you think he meant by that? A line formed between Peter's eyebrows. You said he's been divorced since your dad was young, right? And your grandma is still alive. So, I'm not sure who he could be talking about. My great-aunt said he seemed certain that he'd get to see this woman, I said, remembering the strange feeling that had come over me as my mom had relayed the information to me. She said my great-aunt described Grandpa as almost giddy, which is so unlike him. I loved my grandpa, but giddy he was not. Oh, honey. Who knows what kind of medications he was taking for his pain? I know. I gazed out at the ocean, the dark waves riding in one after the other in an endless march toward the sandy shore. My great-aunt described him as lucid while saying I finally get to see her again, though. And he'd seemed happier than she'd seen him in decades. Well, that's a good thing then. Why question it? Peter leaned over and put his arm around me, tucking me into his shoulder as he kissed my temple. Let's give a toast to your grandpa. Really? I asked, leaning back and lifting my wine glass. To your grandpa, he said, raising his glass. A somewhat stoic man, who was giddy in the end. He raised an eyebrow and gave me a tilted nod, as if to remind me this was a good thing. I supposed he was right, but the personality change seemed odd. A man, who used to visit Blue Moon Bay in his younger days and loved it so much that his son moved here years later, thankfully, because otherwise I wouldn't have met you. And that would have been truly tragic. To Grandpa. I bumped my glass into Peter's, a celebratory clink ringing out into the air merging with the sounds of the waves crashing. We both sipped our wine. I love you, Grandpa. Forever and always. We sat back in our Adirondack chairs, watching the waves, and thinking our own thoughts. The thoughts of my grandpa being giddy still nagged at my mind, which felt a little unsettling. Maybe Peter was right that the important thing was that he was happy in his final hours. Giddy, he was giddy. I shook my head. So unlike him. Finally, I set my glass of wine down and turned to look at the weathered pillars that held the plaque with the legend of Blue Moon Bay. The red and white lights twinkled above, and as my gaze lowered to the plaque, a chill rolled through me. A woman stood next to the plaque, her fingers tracing the bronze-embossed letters as if she treasured each and every one of them. Her dark hair blew in the breeze, and she wore a large straw sun hat, with a white sash around it, and a summery dress. Hello? It was winter, not summer. Christmas was only a week away. Plus, there was a full moon in the sky, a blue moon for that matter. No sun to be seen until tomorrow. Well, if we were lucky. BRRR. Still, there she stood, which was so weird. I mean, I hadn't seen her come down the steps behind us or walk past where we sat in our Adirondacks tucked against the small bluff. Where had she come from? And what was she doing here all by herself? I glanced over at Peter, who seemed to have just noticed her. He turned to me with a questioning look. I widened my eyes. He shrugged in return. We watched her in silence as she continued to stay in that spot by the bay. Finally, she wrapped her arms around herself and turned to look in the opposite direction down the beach. As if mesmerized, my gaze followed hers along the sandy shore, and I could make out a figure in the distance walking toward us. Chills zipped down my spine and both of my arms. The gait was familiar and he drew closer, but I couldn't place the tingles of recognition. I could tell he was a young man, but probably only in his late teens. Did I know anyone that young? When he reached the spot just in front of us, he turned in my direction and met my gaze. His brown eyes, upturned nose, and full lips mirrored mine. No, it couldn't be. The corners of his mouth twitched as if he held a secret. Giddy. The man looked positively giddy. My eyes watered and my heart leapt, but I sat frozen, unable to move. Finally, he winked at me and I placed a hand to my heart, wanting him to know how much I loved him. At the same time I wondered how this could possibly be happening. As he approached the young woman, she clasped her hands in front of her, bringing her fingers to her mouth and covering the most excited smile I'd ever seen. Her emerald green eyes shined and I thought she might run to him and leap into his arms. But she stayed rooted in that very spot by the bay until he arrived in front of her. A blue moon hung in the night sky, illuminating their kiss as the couple reunited in each other's arms. Their kiss was one of forever love that filled my heart with joy. Silver glitter appeared around the outline of their embraced bodies, sparkling and shimmering as the images faded away into mist that finally dissipated. I turned to Peter with wide and watery eyes, and his awestruck expression told me I hadn't imagined the reunion of the lovers from the Kissed by the Bay legend. The couple who had vowed that everyone who kissed at that exact point by the bay, under a blue moon, would be in love forever, as I knew they would be forever in heaven. The end. If you enjoyed spending time with these characters, be sure to read Abigail's story in Million Dollar Date, the Do-Over Date series, Book 1. You have been listening to the Holiday Shop, Blue Moon Bay series, Book 8, by Susan Hatler, copyright 2019 by Susan Hatler, audiobook copyright 2023 by Susan Hatler. Susan Hatler is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author who writes humorous and emotional women's fiction and young adult novels. Many of Susan's books have been translated into German, Spanish, French, and Italian. A natural optimist, she believes life is amazing, people are fascinating, and imagination is endless. She loves spending time with her characters and hopes you do, too.